What if I told you not all angels were cast down in fire, that some fell not in fury but in longing, that they did not scream in rebellion, they wept? And what if I told you they begged to return, but the skis that once welcomed them never opened again? This is not a tale of demons with horns. This is a tale of angels who once watched over the world. And when they chose desire over duty, they weren't just punished, they were forgotten. Welcome to the first breath of a story lost beneath centuries of dust, buried between the cracks of scripture, whispered in forbidden scrolls, the story of the Watchers, and the silence that answered their tears. They were not created to fall. They were not destined to betray. The Watchers, also called Grigori in ancient tongues, were chosen, not to rule, not to rebel, but to watch. Appointed as guardians over the children of earth, they stood at the veil between the celestial and the human, ever seeing, ever silent, sentinels of divine order. They were the eyes of heaven until those eyes looked too long, and what they saw was beauty. The daughters of man, soft in voice, radiant in form, bearing a mystery the angels could never touch. They were not temptresses, they were not sinful, they were simply human, and that was enough to unmake the balance of heaven. It did not begin with war, it began with wonder. The Watchers were not cast down. They descended by choice, 200 in number. Their leader, Semyaza, stood atop Mount Hermon and made a vow. Not alone, he said. If we fall together. And so under moonlight and trembling stars they swore an oath, a covenant of descent, not to betray God, but to feel what man could feel. They stepped down, they stepped into flesh. They stepped into love, or what they thought was love, but love turned to lust, and longing turned to domination. And from this forbidden union came beings not of heaven or earth, the Nephilim, giants, tyrants, children of the stars and soil. They did not inherit their father's grace, nor their mother's humility. They inherited power without wisdom, hunger without restraint. The world trembled under their weight, but this was only the beginning. For while the Nephilim ravaged earth, their fathers, the Watchers, saw what they had done, and the silence from heaven grew louder. No voice came down, no answer thundered from the sky, only the cries of man and the guilt that burned within angelic hearts. They had not expected this. They had not intended to ruin the world, so they did the only thing they knew: they prayed. And here lies the great ache of this tale. The Watchers did not rage, they did not fight back. They wept, they begged, they fell on their faces and asked Enoch, the man who walked with God, to carry their plea, to speak for them, to right their sorrow, to bring their tears into heaven's halls. And Enoch listened. He carried their petition. He stood before the throne of the Most High. And when he returned, he brought no pardon, only silence and judgment. Your prayers shall not be heard. You were holy and you knew. You chose flesh over spirit. You were not deceived. You descended. The gates remained closed, but why? Why would heaven turn away from a creature it once called son? Why does mercy not bend for angels when it weeps so often for men? Because angels do not walk blindly. They do not guess. They know, and knowing, they still chose. This is not just a story of punishment. It is a story of the weight of knowing, of what happens when beings who were meant to guard light became shadows themselves. And perhaps the most terrifying part of this tale is not the fall, not the giants, not the curse. It is the silence, the chilling, unchanging silence of God when his sacred laws are broken not by ignorance but by will. And that silence still echoes. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is right now. Because even in this moment, the unseen war moves around us. And if your heart feels called, subscribe for more. And so we begin, with angels who fell not in fire but in longing, with prayers that rose to heaven and returned as silence. But this was only the beginning, for the Watchers would not remain free, and their children would tear at the sky itself. Next, before the Plea, the days of celestial order, where the story returns to the beginning, to a heaven before the ache, to a silence that had not yet fallen, and to the eternal flame of purpose the angels once guarded in perfect harmony. Before the descent, before the tears, before the earth trembled beneath the feet of giants, there was order. There was light without shadow. There was obedience unburdened by choice. Heaven, in its original state, was not a battlefield. It was a breathless harmony, a realm where will flowed not from rebellion but from resonance. Every being moved in perfect accord, not from compulsion but from sacred clarity. This is the world before the wound, before angels wept, before the silence of God fell like a veil. This is the story of what was right before it all went wrong. They were not created for chaos. The angels were forged in purpose, each one inscribed with light and aligned to a task as ancient as time itself. Some were messengers, swift, burning winds who carried divine commands like thunder across the veil. Others were guardians, vast and veiled, sentinels whose gaze could unravel armies yet whose touch was soft as silence on newborn skin. And then there were the watchers, Grigori, the silent eyes. They were not warriors, they were not scribes, they were witnesses. Appointed by decree, they were stationed upon the edge between the invisible and the seen, between the heavens and the earth. But what is a watcher without motion? What is a guardian if the soul begins to ache not from threat but from longing? Yet in those first days there was no ache because there was no fracture because there was no desire. Desire had not yet crept into the fabric of the cosmos, not because it was forbidden but because it was unnecessary. Every being knew its place and found joy in it, not lesser joy. Not joy from ignorance, but the joy of completion, of being what you were made to be. Can you imagine a realm where nothing envies, where no soul questions its worth, where every thought aligns with truth and peace is not pursued, it is inhaled like breath? That was heaven. And in that heaven the Creator reigned not just as master but as source, a light from which all other lights derived meaning. There was no rebellion because there was no fracture in knowing. Until something changed. It didn't begin with the earth. It began with the gaze, the slow turning of eyes not away from heaven, but toward something else. The watchers, positioned as observers of mankind, began to look longer, deeper, not with malice, not with contempt, but with curiosity. And from curiosity came wonder, and from wonder came the first seeds of unrest. But before all that, before the slow corrosion of role and purpose, there was stillness. The watchers had their place, and they were holy in it. They were elevated not above mankind, but above temptation. For in the order of heaven, angels were not granted the same freedom of stumbling as man. They were not born into weakness. They were born in fire. They were born in clarity, and that clarity in the days of celestial order was unbroken. But clarity is not the same as immunity. You see, sacred stories often remind us of the beauty of beginnings, but they also whisper a warning. Even light can forget why it shines when it starts to admire the reflection instead of the source. And perhaps that is what began to happen, not defiance, not evil, just forgetting, a sacred forgetfulness, a slow drifting. The kind that creeps into the heart not as noise but as silence. And isn't that what happens to us too? We begin with a sense of purpose, a rhythm, a truth, but then something catches our eye, a distraction, a hunger, a question, and before long we are not walking away, we are just standing still, watching, lingering, and the longer we linger, the more distant the clarity becomes. Before the plea, before the tears, there were days when the watchers stood upright, flawless, faithful, and heaven saw them and called them good. The Creator does not fashion in vain. Every rank, every duty, every divine rhythm was carved with love. The sons of God shouted for joy, the morning stars sang together, and all things were in order, until the watchers, who were meant to see, began to want. This chapter of our story ends not with a fall, but with a flicker of desire that had not yet spoken, a question that had not yet been asked, a silence that had not yet been broken, but it would be. And when it was, the heavens would not remain untouched. Next, the ones who watched from afar, they did not fall all at once. First they watched, then they admired, then they longed, and what they longed for would cost them eternity. They stood at the edge of heaven and gazed into the world below, not in rebellion, not in scorn, but in awe. They were not just angels, they were the appointed eyes of the Most High, chosen not to speak, not to intervene, but simply to witness. They were the watchers, the Grigori, the silent ones who stood between the sacred and the seen. And for a time, they did only what they were told. They watched. But over time, watching became wondering, and wondering became something else, something dangerous. In the earliest days of Earth's breath, before the winds had gathered names, before men had built towers that reached toward the stars, there were beings of light, stationed not in the skies but just above. The watchers were not cast in fury. They were placed with honor. Their post was a sacred one, not of dominion but of reverent observation. Their task was to behold the unfolding of human life, to learn from it, to ensure its balance, to marvel at the divine story as it took on flesh and form below. And they did marvel, not at cities, not at machines, but at us, at the strange beauty of mankind, at our trembling fragility, our laughter, our labor, our love. They saw something in humanity that even they did not possess, not wings, not radiance, but freedom. For angels, obedience was breath. Their wills were aligned like stars in orbit, never breaking rhythm, never questioning course. But man could choose. He could build or destroy. He could forgive or betray. He could fall and still rise again. And that mystery, that wild, radiant freedom pulled at something deep within the watchers. They were not meant to descend, but they were meant to feel. And what they felt was the slow birth of longing. From afar, they observed the daughters of men, not as objects, but as living echoes of divine creation. Soft, joyful, mortal. The watchers saw how these daughters carried life in their wombs, how they wept when their children died, how they sang at wells, how they looked to the sky and prayed even though they could not see it. And something stirred within the watchers, not lust, not yet, but reverence. A reverence that was never meant to evolve, but did. It began with silence, not the silence of obedience, but the silence of hesitation. They stopped reporting. They stopped reflecting upward. Instead, they watched longer than they should have, lingering on faces, listening to laughter, truly feeling for the first time the ache of being separate. For millennia, they were content to serve, but now they wanted. And here is where the heavens began to dim. Desire was not forbidden to angels because it was evil. It was forbidden because it was too human. The watchers began to speak among themselves, low, cautious, curious. They asked questions they were never meant to form. Could we not join them? Would the Most High truly deny us love? Is obedience still sacred if it leaves the soul hollow? And with every question, the veil between heaven and earth grew thinner, not by decree but by erosion. What they felt is not foreign to us. It is in us still. That gaze, that pause, that slow slip from duty into desire. We begin with distance. We observe. We admire. But then something lingers in the chest. And if we do not turn away, it begins to own us. How many of us have watched from afar, wanting what we were told not to touch? How many have confused sacred reverence with personal craving? How many have fallen, not in one leap, but in 1,000 glances? The watchers were still angels, still radiant, still holy in form, but inside they had changed. And though heaven still called them sons, their hearts were already drifting earthward. What was once duty now felt like distance. What was once purpose now felt like punishment. And when the gaze of angels turns downward long enough, it begins to hunger. They were not evil, they were not monstrous. They were sacred beings who forgot the cost of wanting what was never theirs. They did not yet fall, but the descent had begun. It began in the heart, and once the heart turns, even wings cannot keep you from falling. Next, Mount Hermon, where the covenant was broken, the watchers' gazes would not stay in the sky. Soon they would stand on earth, not in secret, but in rebellion, and on one mountain they would seal their fate together. There is a mountain, silent and tall, its summit buried in snow, its shadow cast over the borders of ancient lands. To the world it is merely stone and wind, but to heaven Mount Hermon was once holy. And then it was desecrated, not by war, not by fire, but by a whisper, a vow made not in humility but in defiance. This was the place where angels made a covenant, not with God, but against him. It was not done in chaos, it was done in solemnity. 200 divine beings, the Watchers, the Grigori, climbed the sacred heights of Hermon, their wings veiled in dusk, their hearts heavy with what they were about to do. They did not laugh. They did not shout. They bound themselves in oaths that no angel was ever meant to swear. And on that mountain, still and ancient, a covenant was carved, one that would split heaven from earth. The leader among them was Semiaza. He was not the most powerful, but he was the one the others trusted to speak the words they dared only think. With fire in his eyes and dread in his voice, he stood before the assembly. The wind howled, the trees bent as if mourning, and the heavens held their breath. "Let us all swear an oath," he said, "and bind ourselves together not to turn back from this path nor to abandon it." And they did. Each one stepped forward, each one whispered his name into the wind, each one sealed his fate with a vow, not alone, together. They were not casting off heaven, they were reaching for earth, not to destroy but to possess. The Watchers did not hate humanity, they were enamored by it. But admiration unchecked can become obsession, and obsession left unguarded can lead even the holy to ruin. They had watched the daughters of men with longing, but now they would descend. Not to teach, not to warn, but to take. Mount Hermon, whose name would later mean the place of the oath, became an altar that night, not of sacrifice but of intention. It was a reversal of creation, a rupture in the divine flow, for angels were not made for marriage, nor for the bearing of children. Their essence was not compatible with flesh, but desire does not ask permission. And so, under the cover of stars, the Watchers turned the sacred into shadow. And when they descended, the world below would never be the same again. But what truly happened on that mountain? Why did they need an oath? Why bind themselves together? Because Semiaza knew that once they crossed that line, some would want to turn back. Some would tremble at the consequences. Some would remember the weight of divine law. So the oath was not just rebellion, it was insurance. If one falls, all must fall. If one turns away, all are condemned. There would be no retreat, no repentance, only descent. And this is the terrifying beauty of Mount Hermon. It was not a place of chaos. It was a place of cold, calculated decision. A choice made in full knowledge of what it meant. They were not tricked. They were not tempted by a serpent. They walked into the fire with their eyes open. Because sometimes the greatest rebellions are not born in rage but in reason, in slow reasoning, in the seductive logic of why not. And is that not the path many of us walk today? We don't fall with fury, we fall with intention, with planning, with an oath in our mouths and silence in our hearts. Mount Hermon speaks still. Its peaks catch the wind, its stones remember the oath, its roots still echo with the names of those who chose flesh over eternity. Semiaza, Azazel, Arakiba, Kakabil, Tamiel, Ramiel, and many more. 200 stars dimmed. 200 lights sank into the soil of earth. Not for power, not for war, but for love that turned to hunger. This is not just a tale of angels. It is a reflection of the soul's crossroads, of what happens when we stand on our own Mount Hermon, when desire battles duty, when beauty tempts boundaries, when we whisper oaths in the dark that we cannot unspeak. Have you ever made a promise to your own destruction? A silent vow, a hidden pact, a decision no one else saw but you know. It changed everything. Mount Hermon is not just a mountain, it is a mirror. And so the Watchers descended, not in chains, not in wrath, but in unity. Together they would touch the earth. Together they would take mortal wives. Together they would conceive giants. And together they would face the silence of heaven. Next, flesh that called to heaven. What happened when the divine mingled with the dust? What was born from their unions? And why did the earth itself cry out for justice? The Watchers would soon realize desire comes with a cost, and some creations should never exist. There are moments in history that do not echo, they scar. Moments where heaven and earth touched, but not in blessing, in violation. What happens when the divine steps into desire? When those made of flame and light touch that which was formed from dust and blood? This is not a love story. It is a fracture, and its tremors still ripple beneath the bones of the world. They descended, the Watchers, not with swords, but with eyes full of longing. not in violence but in silence. They had once gazed from afar, marveling at the daughters of man, women who laughed beneath fig trees, who spun wool and whispered prayers, who knew sorrow and strength in equal measure. The angels admired them not because they were flawless, but because they were free. And so, drawn by a hunger they never knew they could feel, they stepped into the realm of flesh. It was not meant to be. For what is spirit to flesh? What is immortal to mortal? How does light embrace clay without tearing the heavens in the process? But they came, not one, not a few, 200 angels, each taking for themselves a woman, not by divine command but by sacred betrayal. They adorned them with knowledge, not love. They taught them enchantments, signs of the stars, and secrets of metals. They gave them gifts that dripped with divine mystery and poisoned the soil of innocence. And from this unnatural union came a birth the world was not ready to carry. The children were giants, but not merely in height. They were Nephilim, born of heaven's essence and earth's blood. Creatures neither angel nor man, neither holy nor fallen, but something new. They consumed all. They did not fit. They did not rest. Their appetites grew like roots in corrupted ground. They devoured beasts, then men, then each other. They were not just the children of angels, they were the consequence. And what of the women, the ones chosen or taken? Did they weep beneath the weight of these children whose limbs stretched in their wombs like twisted trees? Did they regret the touch that once shimmered with wonder, now burned with shame? They were not evil, they were vessels, they were mothers of sorrow. And perhaps they were the first to understand that when the divine crosses its own boundaries, it is the weak who bleed first. Heaven watched, the stars dimmed, the earth groaned, and silence fell. The kind of silence that comes before judgment. For the angels had not just broken a rule, they had rewritten a pattern. They took what was not given and created what was never meant to be. And so, the line between the sacred and the profane was shattered. But what drove them? Was it lust? Or was it loneliness? Was it rebellion? Or was it longing? Perhaps the greatest tragedies are not born in rage, but in hunger for something holy, expressed in unholy ways. The angels did not hate heaven. They missed it, but they chose something else. And in doing so, they cast shadows over every gift they once bore. What had been light became fire. What had been wisdom became weapon. What had been wonder became corruption. And so we ask, have we not done the same? Have we not taken what is divine, love, power, knowledge, and bent it to our own cravings? Have we not birthed giants in our own lives, unseen, unspoken, that now devour our peace? The story of the Watchers is not just myth, it is a mirror. Flesh was never meant to hold the weight of heaven, and when it tries, it breaks. The Nephilim were not merely giants, they were storms in skin. Their breath scorched the soil, their laughter echoed like thunder, and their hands crushed what they did not understand. Even the angels began to fear what they had made. Even they saw the madness in their own reflection. But it was too late. The mingling had been done. The divide had been crossed. And heaven was now silent. There is a cost to forbidden union, not always in fire, sometimes in silence. When the Creator hides his face, that is when we know we have stepped too far. And yet, even now, this story is not about monsters. It is about the longing of the soul to touch what it was told to admire from afar. The Watchers were not evil, they were unguarded. They were divine but unfinished. And their fall was not sudden, it was slow. It was soft, it was human. Next, the giants born of stars, what became of these children, the Nephilim? How did they walk the earth? And why did creation itself begin to scream beneath their footsteps? What happens when heaven's seed births violence into the veins of the world? We go next to the rise of the giants, and the beginning of earth's cry for help. They were not born of this world, and yet they walked upon it, breathing its air, breaking its laws, shaking its soil with every step. They were not just giants, they were the children of forbidden fire and fragile flesh. Born not from blessing but from a fracture between realms. The Nephilim, sons of fallen angels, daughters of mortal women. A hybrid race, towering in form and terrifying in purpose. They did not belong to heaven, they did not belong to earth. They belonged to the wound the rift created when angels took what was not theirs. The ancient texts speak of them in tones of awe and fear. There were giants in the earth in those days, mighty men of old, men of renown. But renown is not the same as righteousness. Power is not the same as peace. These giants were not noble titans. They were intelligent, yes, radiant in strength, sharp in mind, but they were born of rebellion, and rebellion does not raise children in gentleness. Imagine it, a child born with the eyes of a star and the hunger of a beast. He towers over villages before the age of 10. He speaks languages never taught. He lifts stones that no army could move. And yet he feels no love for mankind, only superiority, because his fathers, the Watchers, taught him nothing of humility, only how to take, only how to conquer. The Nephilim were raised in the shadow of pride, and their shadows darkened the earth. They devoured the harvests, not just the food but the people. Wherever they walked, rivers ran red, mountains were split, cities knelt in fear, not reverence. The giants did not seek to rule, they sought to dominate, to mold the earth in their image, not the Creator. And this was when the ground itself began to cry out. The scriptures are subtle, but the apocryphal writings, the Book of Enoch, the Book of Giants, they do not whisper, they warn. They tell of creatures 300 cubits tall, of giants who consumed entire nations, of beasts born from the union of Nephilim and animals, mutations that blurred the line between creation and abomination. This was not evolution, this was contamination. Heavenly DNA mingled with dust and multiplied into madness. But why did heaven allow them to rise? Why not stop them the moment they were born? Because mercy often waits until the cries of the innocent drown out the silence of patience. Heaven heard, but it waited until the earth itself could bear no more. All flesh had corrupted its way. The earth was filled with violence. The Nephilim were not just giants in body, they were giants in impact. They tore the veil between heaven and earth until creation itself became unrecognizable. And here is where we must pause, because this story is not ancient alone. It is spiritual. It is psychological. It is still happening. Have we not birthed our own giants? Ideas, technologies, institutions that began as brilliance and became beasts. Have we not taken forbidden wisdom, wrapped it in beauty, fed it with ambition, and watched it grow until it no longer served us, but demanded to be served? The Nephilim are not just mythic beings. They are metaphors for what happens when power is birthed without humility, when creation is pursued without permission. The giants ruled by fear. They built nothing sacred. They only consumed. They were not kings, they were catastrophes. Some legends say they warred among themselves, that even their own kind grew too vast to coexist, that even in their strength there was no peace. Because what is unnatural cannot sustain harmony. It must either burn or be buried. And so the Nephilim lived until the sky grew quiet, until the stars began to dim, until the heavens prepared an answer. Before the flood, before the judgment, there was dread, a spiritual heaviness that settled over the earth like the breath of something ancient, waiting, watching, weeping. The Nephilim may have ruled men, but they could not rule the mercy of the Most High, and mercy, when delayed too long, becomes justice. Perhaps the greatest tragedy of the giants was not their strength, but that they could never be anything else. They were not given a choice. They were born from the rebellion of others, and in that they were cursed. And yet they carried a soul, a spark, but one corrupted from the moment of conception. And so the earth bore them for a time until it couldn't. And what came next was not wrath but cleansing. Next, the cry that shook the throne, the giants would rise, but they would not be eternal, because the cries of the earth, of mankind, of creation itself, would finally reach the ears of heaven. And what heaven did next would echo through every generation. There are cries. And then there are groans that rise from the bones of the world. Sounds too ancient for human ears, too sacred for language. This was not a single scream. It was a trembling, a chorus of grief echoing from the soil, from the blood of the innocent, from the sky that once watched in silence until silence could no longer stand. And when this cry reached heaven, the throne did not tremble, it listened. The world had become a place of dread, not because of storms, not because of famine, but because the Nephilim walked freely upon it. They were not rulers, they were devourers, the sons of angels born without restraint. They crushed what they could not understand, mocked what they could not create, and fed upon that which was never theirs to touch. Their power was not balanced by wisdom. Their knowledge was not tempered by mercy. And so men fell, women wept, children disappeared, villages vanished beneath their shadows. The sky seemed farther than it had ever been. And in this silence a sound rose not from lips but from the soul of the earth. It is said in the old writings that the earth groaned, not metaphorically, not poetically, literally. The whole earth has been corrupted and all flesh upon it has become defiled. This was not merely rebellion, this was desecration. And the cry that rose was not only from humans. It came from the mountains, the rivers, the trees, even the air, all bent under the weight of the unnatural. Can you feel it? That sacred moment, when pain becomes so loud that even the divine cannot delay response. Heaven had waited for repentance, waited for remembrance, waited for the watchers to return to their posts, but they did not return. And now their children had corrupted what was once called very good. The cry rose, higher than mountains, deeper than oceans, heavier than sin. It wasn't just a cry for help. It was a plea for justice, a plea for cleansing, and the throne of heaven. Eternal, unshaken heard. But what does it mean for heaven to respond? Not with thunder, not with immediate fire, but with movement. The divine does not rush, but when it stirs, the very fabric of creation shifts. And what stirred that day was not wrath, it was mercy reaching its limit. Mercy, when stretched across generations, eventually snaps, not in cruelty, but in righteousness. The Most High sent watchers of a different kind, not the fallen, but the faithful, holy ones, messengers, carriers of the decree, and their message was clear. You see what Azazel has done, how he taught unrighteousness on earth and revealed the eternal secrets, and the earth has become defiled. It was time to act, time to answer the cry. And who brought the cry to the throne? According to ancient texts, it was not just the earth, not just the angels, but a man, one man, righteous, silent, chosen, Enoch. He walked with God, and he walked between realms. He was the bridge, the scribe, the intercessor. He was sent to speak on behalf of man. And in time, he would also carry heaven's judgment back to the watchers. But before that, the heavens had to prepare. And this is where the sacred weight of divine timing reveals itself. For heaven does not simply punish, it warns, it reveals, it offers a final chance. And that chance was about to be delivered through a voice wrapped in thunder and parchment. The cry that shook the throne was not just the sound of injustice, it was a cosmic signal. A breach that could no longer go unhealed. And yet, even as heaven responded, the fallen did not repent. The giants did not hide. They grew louder, bolder, hungrier. It is the nature of pride to scoff at warnings. It is the nature of corruption to deny consequence. But this cry, it teaches us something eternal, that heaven is not deaf. It hears the cries of the abused. It hears the mourning of mothers. It hears the trembling of the soul who says, "This world is too dark. Where is the light?" And when it hears enough, it moves, not with haste, but with holy precision. Perhaps you felt it, that longing inside when life seems unjust, when evil seems unchecked, when power mocks the powerless. Perhaps, even now, your heart joins that ancient cry. And to that this story whispers, you are heard. Justice may be patient, but it never forgets. And mercy has its limits too. Next, Enoch, the scribe of heaven, who was the man chosen to walk among angels. Why was he given the burden of divine messages? And what did he carry from man to heaven and from heaven back to those who had fallen? The next chapter reveals the one whose footsteps echo between realms. He was not a king. He did not lead armies. He did not carry a sword. And yet his name echoes between heaven and earth. Enoch, a man of dust and breath, born into a world ruled by giants, haunted by angels, and watched by heaven. He was not chosen because he was powerful. He was chosen because he walked with God and did not turn away. When the cries of the earth rose into the stars, when the shadows of the Nephilim covered the land, when the silence of heaven cracked with movement, the Most High called upon one man, not to destroy, not to judge, but to listen, and then to speak. Enoch's story is one of sacred paradox. He was mortal, but he spoke with the immortal. He was weak in body, but strong in clarity. He was not one of the watchers, but he would carry their words. The Book of Enoch, preserved in echoes of ancient language, tells of visions, of journeys through layered heavens, of conversations with holy ones, of mysteries hidden from kings and prophets alike. But before he saw heaven, he stood among the fallen. Yes, he was sent down before he was taken up. Imagine it. Enoch, clothed not in armor but humility, approaching the watchers, once radiant, now dim, once noble, now trembling. These were the same angels who had stood on Mount Hermon and swore an oath against the will of the Almighty. Now they stood chained in dread, not in iron but in the fear of divine silence. They had seen the consequences of their rebellion. They had watched their children, the Nephilim, twist the world into ruin. They had heard the earth's cry, and now they wanted to speak. But heaven would not hear their voices directly, so they turned to a man, to Enoch, the one who still walked with the light. They gave him their petition, a scroll, a message, a plea wrapped in trembling ink and broken hearts. They asked him to carry their words before the throne of the Most High, to ask not for power, not for restoration, but for mercy. Tell him we weep. Tell him we did not foresee the end. Tell him we did not hate, we only wanted to love. But was it enough? Could a single man carry the weight of angelic sorrow? And so Enoch began his ascent, not with wings, but with invitation. The heavens opened for him, layer by layer, gate by gate, each realm more radiant than the last, each guardian more ancient than words. And in every sky voices spoke, "Who is this born of dust who walks where angels dare not speak?" And yet he was not turned away, because obedience opens doors that force and fury never could. The vision of heaven Enoch received was not a fantasy. It was a burden. He saw the dwelling places of the righteous. He saw the punishment reserved for the fallen. He saw stars that wept. He saw rivers of fire, thrones wrapped in silence, and scrolls that wrote themselves as the deeds of the world unfolded. And above them all he stood before the glory, the presence beyond name. And he did what even the watchers could not. He spoke. "Most High," his soul whispered, "they have sent me to plead. They are in sorrow. They ask for forgiveness." There was no thunder, no lightning, only the weight of eternity pressing down in silence. And then a voice. "The watchers have defiled what was pure. They knew the law. They broke it in full knowledge. Their petition shall not be granted. They shall see neither peace nor forgiveness." Enoch bowed, not in defeat but in understanding. Mercy is wide, but rebellion with full knowing, that is a different judgment. He returned with the answer. And when the watchers read his words, they did not argue. They wept. The same beings who once swore unbreakable oaths on a mountaintop now shook in regret beneath the weight of divine silence. They were not destroyed, not yet, but they were denied. And in that denial was a greater torment than death. But Enoch, he did not stop there. He recorded everything. Visions of angels, maps of stars, prophecies of floods, and warnings to generations yet unborn. He became the scribe of heaven, his pen dipped not in ink but in revelation. Some say Enoch was later taken, that he did not taste death but was lifted into eternity, that his body did not decay because his obedience had become too holy for earth to hold. Others say he became the guardian of sacred secrets, that he still writes, still watches, still walks between the realms. We do not know, and perhaps we're not meant to, but his message remains. A reminder to both angels and men that rebellion has a cost, that mercy has limits, that a single faithful soul can become the bridge between worlds. And maybe that's the whisper for you today. You don't need wings to walk with heaven. You don't need power to carry sacred things. You need obedience, stillness, a heart that listens when the world screams. For Enoch wasn't born for glory, he was born for presence. And the presence changed everything. Next, the The scrolls that were never read. What did Enoch see in the records of heaven? What secrets did he carry that were too dangerous to reveal? And why were some scrolls written but never opened? We descend next into the silence of the sacred archives. Some stories are spoken, some are sung, and some are sealed. Written in ink the world was never meant to touch, locked behind heavenly silence and buried in the archives of eternity. These are the scrolls of Enoch. Not all were read. Not all were shared, but all were witnessed. He was not just a prophet, he was a recorder of consequence. A man caught between two worlds, chosen to document crimes no man could see and carry decrees no angel dared speak. While the watchers wept and the earth trembled under the weight of their children, Enoch's pen moved in silence. He wrote what others feared to remember. He wrote what the heavens demanded to preserve. In the ancient texts, fragments of the Book of Enoch and whispers from the Book of Giants, we are told of these scrolls. He did not merely deliver a message. He etched judgment into time, a record not just of events, but of motives, of intention, of hearts. Because heaven does not punish action alone, it weighs the shadows of desire. One scroll spoke of Semyaza, the leader of the Watchers, who once stood proud on Mount Hermon, now bowed beneath the weight of regret. His name was carved beside his crime, he who turned longing into lawlessness. Another scroll bore the mark of Azazel, the angel who taught forbidden arts, crafted the weapons of war, and ignited mankind's obsession with vanity, violence, and enchantment. To Azazel all sin is ascribed. These were not just names. They were records of ruin. Each scroll became a mirror, reflecting what happens when the sacred is sold for sensation. Enoch wrote of how the Watchers corrupted mankind. He listed the teachings they passed on: astrology, sorcery, metalwork, seduction. Knowledge that was meant to be sacred unveiled too soon, revealed without protection, handed to a world too young to hold it. And the result? The floodgates of darkness opened, not with roars but with whispers. But what of the scrolls that were never read? What did Enoch see that was too heavy for human eyes, too dangerous to pass down? Legends say there were writings given only to him, inscribed by the hand of the holy ones and sealed with the fire of divine will. Some say these scrolls contain the timelines of creation, not past alone, but future. Some believe they hold the names of stars that have not yet been born, the destinies of nations, the descent of angels still hidden, the final war and the gates that will open before it begins. One scroll, it is said, bore only a symbol, no words. A seal so sacred that even Enoch could not look upon it. It was not meant to be understood, only acknowledged, because not all sacred things are meant to be known. Some are meant to remind us that we are not the author of reality. Imagine it, a chamber in heaven, silent but alive, walls glowing with unspoken truths, shelves of scrolls humming with light, each one a record of what has passed, what is, and what may yet come. And at the center, a single scroll wrapped in 7 seals, waiting, sleeping, but not forgotten. These writings were not just for judgment, they were for memory, because heaven remembers. Even when the world forgets, even when generations turn away, even when empires rise in arrogance and fall in ash, the scrolls remain. Unmoving, unyielding, untouched by time. But why write them at all? Why preserve the crimes of those already condemned? Because justice does not disappear in the dark, and truth is not silenced by time. Because one day, when the veil is torn, when the last trumpet sounds, when the world stands bare before its maker, the scrolls will be opened, and none will be able to say, "I did not know." Enoch's role was not only to speak, it was to bear witness, to ensure that every choice, every fall, every plea was written before the eyes of heaven. He was not just a prophet, he was a scribe of judgment and a guardian of secrets. But these sacred scrolls also ask something of us. What are we writing with our own lives? What unseen story are we leaving behind? Will our names be remembered for the truth we carried, or the truth we compromised? Because every soul writes, every decision leaves ink on the invisible parchment of existence. And when the book is opened, not just the scrolls of angels, but the stories of you and me, what will be read aloud? The scrolls that were never read are waiting. They are not silent. They are not forgotten. They are sealed, yes, but only for now. Because a time is coming when nothing sealed will stay shut, and in that hour the hidden will rise. The truth will walk like thunder, and the names written in eternity will speak again. Next, the plea for mercy, a cry from the abyss. The scrolls were not the only thing Enoch carried. There was also a voice, a desperate, trembling voice from the watchers themselves. But could mercy reach that far? Could even the abyss be heard? We descend next into the plea that pierced eternity. Not all rebellions end in thunder. Some end in tears, and not all judgment is wrapped in fire. Some comes with silence. The watchers, once radiant, once revered, had fallen. Their wings no longer bore light. Their names no longer echoed in heaven. They were not slain, nor were they exalted. They were held, bound beneath the earth, hidden in dark places where stars do not shine, where time does not pass in days but in ache. And from that place a sound rose. It was not a roar. It was not a curse. It was something far more sacred and far more terrifying. A cry from the abyss, a cry for mercy. They had seen what they had created. The Nephilim, their children born in longing, raised in pride, now ravaging the earth like beasts born of stars and rage. They had watched the floodgates of violence open, and innocence drown beneath their legacy. And with every death, every corruption, every ruin, they remembered. They remembered the summit of Mount Hermon where they once swore in unity, hearts burning with desire, lips trembling with forbidden ambition. Now those same lips whispered prayers, not in pride, but in dust. We did not know, we did not see the end. We did not mean to tear the veil. But heaven had not moved. Heaven had only watched. So the watchers, desperate and undone, wrote. They inscribed a petition, a sacred plea, not of defiance, but of surrender. They gave it to Enoch, the man who still walked with God, the only voice the heavens might hear, and their words were soaked in despair. We ask not for return, we ask not for power, we ask for forgiveness. We ask for peace. They did not ask to ascend, they only begged not to be forgotten. Bound in shadow, they cried out for light. Chained in regret, they longed to be known again by the one who had once breathed glory into their being. But was mercy possible for those who had once stood beside the throne and still chose to fall? Could a creature of such light be forgiven for choosing darkness? Could eternity, once rejected, be reopened? The scroll Enoch carried was unlike any other. It was not wrapped in flame, it was wrapped in grief. The kind of grief that only immortals can feel. Not regret for being punished, but sorrow for what they had become. They had not just broken a law, they had broken themselves. Heaven heard, but heaven did not weep. And in this moment, in this sacred intersection of justice and sorrow, we learn a truth rarely spoken, that not all tears are enough. Because to fall while not knowing is different than to fall while knowing full well. The watchers did not stumble. They stepped into rebellion. They planned their descent. They sealed it with an oath. And even though their sorrow was real, the line had already been crossed. The response came not in fire, not in thunder, but in words as sharp as eternity. Your petition shall not be granted. You were holy and you knew. You chose the daughters of men. You revealed secrets not yours to give. You brought forth corruption from knowledge. And now you will await the great day of judgment. Until then, there shall be no peace for you. Imagine it, the silence that followed, not in the air but in their hearts. For the first time, the watchers understood that even mercy has a structure, that even compassion, when violated, must bow to justice. This was not cruelty. This was cosmic order, a reminder that the sacred cannot be bargained with after it has been betrayed. But within their plea, within their cry, is something deeply human, because we too plead, we too regret. We too wonder, will our cries be heard? Is there a point of no return? And here lies the great mystery. The watchers were denied, but man was not, because man was made in weakness, but they were made in glory, and those who are made of glory are held to the weight of it. They were not just creatures who sinned. They were guardians who chose to become devourers, but the plea still lives in the scrolls, in the air between heaven and earth. because even those who fall deepest still hope. Even those cast into darkness whisper upward, and that whisper is eternal. We may not be watchers, but we know their ache, the ache of choosing wrongly, of breaking something sacred, of wanting to undo what cannot be undone. And the watchers, even in chains, taught us something priceless, that to cry for mercy is never weakness. It is remembrance, it is reverence, it is reaching upward even when heaven does not answer. Next, why heaven said no, but why did mercy end here? Why were the watchers, the sons of glory, refused forgiveness while murderers and kings walked free? What does heaven see that we cannot? We now step into the courtroom of eternity to understand why the door stayed shut. Not all doors in heaven open to tears. Not all cries rise high enough to move the throne. And not every soul that begs for mercy will hear it echo back. There are some decisions, so absolute, so sacred, that even sorrow cannot unmake them. This was the fate of the watchers, and this is why heaven said no. It was not rage, it was not vengeance. The response from the throne did not thunder with anger, it whispered with something far more frightening: finality. Your plea shall not be heard, your forgiveness shall not come, you shall not rise nor return. You knew, and still you chose. The watchers had fallen, yes, but they had not fallen in confusion. They fell with clarity, with conviction. They were not deceived, they were divine. They had seen the face of truth and still walked away from it. This is not the story of weak beings who stumbled into temptation. This is the story of angels who planned a rebellion, who bound themselves in oath, who exchanged their celestial command for fleeting desire. And heaven remembers intent. Justice is not cold, but it is precise. It does not forget who you were before you broke who you became. The watchers were not mortals. They were not born into confusion. They were made in light. They were placed above nations, above tongues, above temptation. They were meant to protect what they chose to possess. And herein lies the wound. They did not merely fall, they inverted their purpose. Guardians became violators. Watchers became invaders. Protectors became progenitors of destruction. That kind of betrayal does not echo, it shatters. But then, why do humans receive mercy so freely? Why are we forgiven again and again, when the angels who fell but once were denied forever? Because man was not created in flame. Man was shaped from earth and filled with breath. Man was born into struggle, angels were not. Our souls are tested through trial. Theirs were designed for obedience. We fall in weakness, they fell in will. And willful rebellion from a place of knowledge is not the same as the stumblings of dust. What the watchers did was not a mistake. It was a decision, a conscious, coordinated breach of boundaries they knew to be sacred. They taught forbidden knowledge. They corrupted innocence. They mingled what heaven had separated. And when their creations, the Nephilim, began to devour the earth, they did not rise to stop them. They watched as the world they once protected crumbled under their legacy. Heaven is patient, but heaven is not blind. Mercy flows like a river, but even rivers have banks. And when mercy is poured onto those who knew and still betrayed, it ceases to be mercy. It becomes mockery. There is a divine threshold, a sacred point beyond which no return exists, not because forgiveness is withheld, but because the one who fell no longer fits into what they left behind. The watchers had reshaped themselves by reshaping the world. They didn't just break a law, they altered creation, and creation cried out for justice. This chapter, then, is not only about angels, it is about us, because we too make decisions. We too are given knowledge. We too walk sacred paths with full awareness of the cost of leaving them. And every soul must ask, when I fall, do I fall in ignorance or in full knowing? Because heaven does not forget the weight of knowing. There are prayers that rise like incense, and there are prayers that hit the gates of heaven and fall. The watcher's prayer was the latter, not because it wasn't sincere, but because it was too late. Mercy comes like a sunrise to those waiting in darkness. But it does not come to those who built the night and called it light. Still, the sorrow of the watchers teaches us something holy, that no matter how high you began, no matter how bright your light once was, You are not immune to the consequences of willful betrayal. Sacredness is not inherited, it is honored. And when it is not, it is removed. So heaven said no, not in cruelty but in truth. For to forgive what is unrepentant in its core, to restore what no longer seeks restoration, is not mercy, it is madness. The watchers would remain bound, fallen, awaiting judgment, their plea written in the silence of heaven, their names etched into the story of what happens when even angels forget who they were. Next, bound in darkness, awaiting judgment. So where are they now? What became of the watchers after the silence? What is the prison they were cast into, and what does it mean for us? We descend next into the shadows beneath the earth, where glory waits in chains. There are prisons that do not have doors, chains that do not clink, and darkness that does not sleep. Some beings are not exiled to far lands. They are buried beneath creation itself, hidden, forgotten, but never beyond justice. This is where the watchers dwell, not in flames, not in torment, but in waiting. After heaven refused their plea, after mercy was denied, after the silence thundered louder than any judgment, a decree came. They would not be destroyed, not yet. They would be held, suspended in a place without light, without time, without song, bound in darkness, awaiting the day when all secrets are weighed. Where are they? The ancients called it the abyss, the deep, the pit. In Hebrew, Sheol. In Greek, Tartaros. Not hell, not yet, but a place beneath the earth, beneath memory, beneath mercy, a vault, a tomb, a courtroom on pause. And the angels who did not keep their positions of authority but abandoned their proper dwelling, these he has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day. Jude 1:6, the scrolls are clear. Their punishment is not finished because their judgment has not yet begun. Imagine it, 200 divine beings once clothed in light, now cloaked in silence, suspended between what they were and what they will become. There are no flames licking at their feet, no demons clawing at their forms, just stillness and the unbearable sound of waiting. The chains that bind them are not made of metal, they are made of divine decree. For what heaven locks, no force on earth can break. Their prison is not a place, it is a condition, a spiritual holding, a state of cosmic pause. And it remains sealed until the day appointed from the foundation of the world. But why wait? Why not destroy them now? Because judgment is sacred, and sacred judgment comes in fullness of time, not in impulse, not in vengeance, but in precision. The watchers are a warning written into the bones of the earth, a reminder that rebellion can rise, but it will never escape reckoning. Their existence in shadow is not just punishment, it is prophecy. And the prophecy is this, that what hides now will rise again, not in glory but in testimony. On the final day, when the veil between realms is lifted, when angels and mortals stand together before the throne, the watchers will speak once more, but not in defense, in confession. Their chains are not just bonds, they are witnesses, holding the weight of every forbidden act, every corrupted gift, every secret passed to man that should have remained sealed. They wait, but they do not sleep. Because even in silence, the soul does not forget what it once was. Some say the watchers still whisper, that their regret hums beneath the foundations of the world, that their memory seeps into dreams, that they reach out not to escape but to warn, to remind every soul that touches sacred knowledge, every being who flirts with power not meant to be grasped. There is a line, and if you cross it, you may not be judged yet, but you will be bound. Their imprisonment is not irrelevant. It is alive in the story of every temptation. We often believe freedom is the right to choose anything, but the watchers remind us freedom without obedience is a slow descent into chains. They were not chained when they rebelled. They were not chained when they took human wives. They were not chained when their children devoured the earth. They were only chained when the silence of heaven turned into action, and by then it was too late. How many of us live in that silence now, not yet judged, not yet corrected, but slowly sinking into consequences that haven't bloomed yet? The watchers are not just a past event. They are a mirror. They show us what happens when beings designed for purpose decide to rewrite their own path. and still the earth remembers them. Their names echo in ancient stones. Their fall is carved into the spine of creation, not in myth, but in warning, because they are not gone, they are only waiting, and so are we. The final day approaches, the day when all that was hidden will rise, not as stories, but as witnesses. The chains will be unsealed, the abyss will release its captives, and the watchers will face the throne they once stood beside. Until then, they remain beneath us, beneath memory, beneath mercy, beneath the surface of a world that has forgotten how close the abyss truly is. But the scrolls have not forgotten, and neither has heaven. Next, Azazel's curse and the scapegoat of sin, but among the watchers one name is spoken with more dread than the rest. Azazel, what did he teach mankind? Why was he set apart? And why does his curse still linger in rituals practiced even today? We now follow the shadow of the fallen teacher whose punishment became a living symbol of blame, guilt, and the long road back to purity. Not all rebellions are born with swords. Some begin with whispers, some with secrets, and some with teachings never meant for the sons of dust. Among the watchers, one name falls heavier than the rest, not for what he destroyed, but for what he revealed. Azazel. He was not just a fallen one, he was the instructor of corruption, the one who did not only break the boundary, he mapped the way for others to follow. In the scrolls of Enoch, while the others are listed for their descent, Azazel stands apart, marked, named, cursed. To Azazel all sin is ascribed. But why? What did he do that made even heaven single him out? It was not only that he descended, it was not merely that he took a wife. Azazel's crime was deeper. He was not just a participant, he was a teacher. He taught men to forge swords and shields, to shape metal into murder. He taught women to adorn themselves with enchantments, to veil the face with powders, to stir desire with the tilt of the eye. He did not kill with his hands, he killed with ideas, forbidden arts, dark alchemy, seduction, weapons, spells. He did not touch the flesh of the world, he touched its imagination. And imagination, once corrupted, rewrites generations. This was Azazel's legacy, to turn wisdom into witchcraft, to paint violence with beauty, to wrap pride in perfume and death in gold. His fall was not loud, it was infectious, and that was more dangerous than war. The Book of Enoch tells us that after the judgment was passed, Azazel was not merely chained. He was buried in a desert, a desolate, forgotten land called Dudil. There a pit was dug, a prison carved into the dust, and Azazel was cast in, covered with jagged stones, left beneath the earth in darkness and disgrace. But his name did not disappear. It echoed across centuries, not in rebellion but in ritual. The Hebrew scriptures speak of him still. In the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, a ritual was commanded. 2 goats were chosen, one to be sacrificed before the altar, the other to be released, but not in mercy, in exile. The high priest would place his hands upon its head and confess over it the sins of the people. Then it would be sent into the wilderness, into the silence, into the shadow, and the goat shall bear upon it all their iniquities unto a land not inhabited. Leviticus 16:22. This was the scapegoat, the bearer of collective sin. And where was it sent? To Azazel. Some scholars say Azazel was simply the name of the wilderness. Others know better. This wasn't just geography, it was symbolism. The sins of the nation were not erased. They were given away, carried by the goat into the realm of one who had embodied sin itself. And here lies the mystery. Azazel, though buried, became a ritual memory, a vessel for guilt, a reminder that sin once taught cannot be forgot. It must be transferred, it must be banished. But the ritual wasn't about Azazel alone, it was about us. Because every soul carries darkness. Every heart has taught others to fall. And we too look for scapegoats. We too whisper blame into the wilderness. We call it psychology, we call it projection. But long ago they called it Azazel. This fallen one, buried in silence, became more than a rebel. He became the recipient of what no one else wanted to carry. He was the figure of defilement, the collector of guilt. The shadow we cast everything into so we could walk away clean. And isn't that still true? We look for someone, anyone, to carry our sins. We blame culture, we blame systems, we blame bloodlines, we blame spirits. But how often do we name our own chains? Azazel teaches us that sin always seeks a host, and if we do not face it, we will throw it into the arms of something darker and call ourselves pure. Heaven did not destroy Azazel. It isolated him, made him a living symbol of what happens when sacred knowledge is weaponized. And every generation that passes must choose. Do we learn from him, or do we repeat him? To this day, the scapegoat ritual lives on in spirit. Every time we confess but refuse to change, every time we seek to unload our guilt without owning it, every time we point outward when we should look inward, Azazel watches, not as a god, not as a demon, but as a reminder that sin, when taught, spreads like wildfire, but accountability is what turns the flame into light. So what became of him? He remains bound, buried, named in the ash of memory, a spirit of exile, a monument to knowledge misused. And yet, even in his curse, he teaches us, because sometimes the cursed are not forgotten. They are remembered so we don't become them. Next, the forbidden teachings they gave us. Azazel was not alone in spreading corruption. Other watchers gave mankind knowledge that would change the world, but not for its healing. What were these hidden arts? What secrets crossed the veil? And how do they still live in us? In the next chapter, we open the scroll of the fallen classroom and reveal what should have never been taught. Some knowledge is sacred, some is survival, and some was never meant to be known. There are teachings so heavy they bend the soul before they ever touch the hands. Truths so potent they burn not with light but with shadow. And when the watchers descended, they did not come empty-handed. They came bearing secrets, secrets from the other side. The Book of Enoch does not describe a war of weapons. It describes a war of ideas, a transference, a forbidden education, and the classroom was earth. Humanity, new, unarmed, still breathing the dew of Eden's memory, became the pupil of celestial rebels, and what they learned would change the world forever. They were not taught to worship. They were taught to manipulate, to bend the stars, to cut the roots of plants and turn them into potions of control. Trace symbols into the sand and speak names not meant to be known aloud. Azazel, we remember, taught warcraft, steel, bronze, blades with edges meant to slice flesh, not fruit. He taught the sharpening of swords and the sharpening of the eye. For alongside the weapon, he taught women to seduce, to line the eyes with black powder, to adorn the face with rouge, to charm, to cast glances that turned desire into weakness. And so lust was no longer a whisper. It was a tool, but Azazel was not alone. Each watcher brought something, a curse wrapped in the skin of wisdom. Semyaza taught enchantments, how to cast spells that twisted will, to speak incantations that could bend the heart of another like wind bends the flame. Erekil taught astrology not for signs but for domination. He mapped the heavens so men could time their rituals to summon and control. Barakil brought the secrets of lightning, Ramiel the signs of the earth, Cockabeel the names and movements of the stars, Penamu how to read and write, and Casteja how to abort the unborn, yes, even that. And while the people marveled at their gods, heaven wept, because these were not gifts, they were violations. Knowledge given without guidance becomes a weapon in the hands of the immature. The watchers did not elevate man, they inflated him. They did not teach him to serve the heavens, they taught him to imitate them, to play God, to summon, seduce, destroy, and manipulate. And man, eager, curious, wounded from Eden's loss, took the teachings and ran into the abyss. From this corruption came war, envy, bloodlines of sorcerers, priests who spoke to unseen forces not in worship but in exchange. Temples were built not to pray but to harness. Altars rose not for mercy but for power. And humanity forgot that some knowledge is meant to remain behind the veil. But what's more terrifying than what they taught is how much of it still lives in us today. Makeup that hides emptiness with beauty. Weapons that kill without mercy. Science used for control. Language used to lie. Rituals masked as self-help. Symbols carved into modern idols. Sorcery now sanitized but still active. We call it psychology when it manipulates, branding when it enchants, empowerment when it seduces, but the seed was planted long ago. These forbidden teachings did not vanish with the flood, they survived, whispers in ancient temples, codes in forgotten scrolls, fragments buried in civilizations that suddenly knew more than they should have. Egypt, Babylon, Mayan cities built with celestial mathematics, rituals carved in stone not from imagination but from memory, the memory of what the Watchers gave. And now we ask, why would angels do this? Why would beings of light unleash such darkness? Because the fall does not come in one step. It begins with desire, then pride, then hunger, then justification. They did not teach to punish. They taught to impress, to be adored, to be worshipped. And what better way than to bring secrets from heaven and give them to earth? But what they forgot was the weight of what they carried. They thought they were spreading power, but they were planting corruption. Like seeds beneath the soil, the forbidden teachings grew, and now their roots choke the world. Yet even in this there is a sacred lesson. Not all knowledge is wisdom. Not all beauty is truth. Not all empowerment is pure. Sometimes the greatest test of the soul is not ignorance, but what we choose to do with what we know. We live in an age where the same forbidden teachings are disguised as enlightenment, but the soul still recognizes what the mind tries to excuse. And if we listen, we'll hear the echo of heaven warning. You were not meant to carry this. The Watchers were not cursed because they knew. They were cursed because they gave what they were commanded to guard. And we made in weakness have now inherited a knowledge that still burns. So now the question turns to us. What will we do with what they gave next? The wives who bore the curse, but what of the women, the mortal daughters who bore the children of the Watchers? Were they victims? Were they complicit? Or were they vessels caught between heaven and hell? We now descend into the hidden sorrow of the womb and the untold pain of the mothers who carried the giants. They were not queens, not sorceresses, not prophetesses etched into stone tablets or sung of in ancient psalms. They were women, mortal, flesh-bound, daughters of the dust. And yet they became the vessels through which heaven's rebellion took its first breath on earth. They did not ask to be chosen. They were seen by eyes that were never meant to look upon them with hunger, seen by angels who should have kept their gaze fixed on the divine, not on the delicate curve of humanity. But once the veil was lifted, once the Watchers descended from the heights and beheld the beauty of the daughters of men, the sacred distance shattered. And the seed of the Nephilim was planted in wombs that had only known silence before. Can you imagine it? The weight of carrying what should not exist. To feel life growing within you and know that it was never meant to be born. They were not just pregnant, they were portals between heaven and earth, between obedience and rebellion, between blessing and curse. Some say they were seduced. Others say they were victims, but what cannot be denied is that they suffered. The texts do not dwell on their names. They are not praised nor cursed, they are forgotten. And perhaps that is the greatest tragedy of all, because they bore the burden but never the legacy. Their sons became giants. Their bodies became temples of forbidden power. Their eyes shimmered with starlight and wrath. But the mothers wept in silence. Imagine watching your child grow into something not quite human. Larger than the others, stronger, hungrier, uncontainable. Imagine holding a baby in your arms knowing that one day he would bring blood to the fields and fear to the skies. And still, you loved him because that's what mothers do, even when heaven has turned its face away. The Book of Enoch tells us of the giants devouring all the labor of men, of their mouths never satisfied, of their strength unmatched and their arrogance rising like smoke. But what of their births? What pain did these women endure when their wombs stretched beyond what was natural, when their cries echoed in the night and the stars themselves trembled at what was being brought forth? This was not just a curse upon the world, it was a curse within their very flesh. And they paid for it, not with judgment but with silence. Scripture speaks of the sins of the Watchers, of the corruption of mankind, of the judgment to come. But the women, they vanish, buried not in fire but in history. We know of Eve, of Sarah, of Miriam, of women who shape prophecy. But the wives of the Watchers, they are ghosts, whispers, and yet without them there would be no Nephilim, no flood, no reckoning. They were the silent hinge upon which the doors of divine judgment would swing. Why did heaven remain silent about them? Was it mercy to spare them eternal blame, or was it sorrow too deep to name? Perhaps they were not cursed but broken, not damned but discarded, or perhaps heaven wept for them in a silence too holy to record. And today we still carry the echoes. There are women who carry burdens they did not choose, who mother children in broken homes, who love what the world has labeled monstrous. There are women whose names will never be written, but whose pain is carved into the soul of history. They are the forgotten mothers, and they are still among us. So what do we learn from the wives who bore the curse? That love is not always clean. That motherhood is not always sacred in the way we expect. That sometimes the most painful stories are the ones heaven only whispers. They were not queens, not warriors, not angels, but they bore the collision of all three. And in their silence we find a mirror of every soul that has ever asked, "Why me?" Because sometimes you carry what others unleashed. You suffer for what others chose. You give birth to something that feels like a mistake but lives anyway. And even then you keep going. You keep loving, not because you are cursed, but because you were chosen to carry what others couldn't. The wives of the Watchers remind us, heaven may record the sins of the powerful, but it never forgets the pain of the unseen. Even if their names were erased from the scrolls, the tears they cried are still counted among the stars. Next, the children that shook the earth, and now the time has come to speak of what came from them. The giants, the legends, the ones whose footprints cracked the soil and whose roars turned nations to dust. Who were the Nephilim? What did they become? And why did the earth groan beneath their weight? In the next chapter we descend deeper into the age of giants. He did not die like other men. He did not return to the soil like Adam, nor was he slain in fury like Abel. Enoch vanished, taken not by shadow but by light. It is said in the ancient scriptures, "And Enoch walked with God. And he was not, for God took him." But what does that mean? What does it mean to walk with God? To disappear from the earth not as a punishment but as a passage into glory. He was not just a man, he was a threshold, a veil between the mortal and the eternal. A voice that echoed across dimensions. The world around him was falling. The Watchers had descended. The Nephilim were rising. Blood soaked the ground like dew. Giants roamed, corrupting the breath of life. And in the midst of it there was Enoch, not building armies, not casting spells, but writing scroll after scroll, ink upon sacred parchment, recording visions, dreams, messages from realms unseen. He became the scribe of the unseen, the keeper of whispers. But was he always meant to rise? Or did heaven choose him because earth could no longer contain what he carried? It began in silence, a voice in the night, a wind that did not move the trees but stirred his soul, and Enoch listened. He followed the light that spoke without words, up the mountain, beyond the clouds, into a realm not made of dust but of glory. And then he was shown the stars, not the ones that twinkled gently in the night, but the fallen ones, the Watchers in chains. He saw their prisons. He heard their cries. He beheld the judgments carved into the stone of heaven. He did not merely visit the skies, he toured the justice of God. The Book of Enoch tells us he saw the secrets of lightning. He walked with angels of punishment. He entered the chambers where souls await their end. He was brought to the tree of life, its fragrance sweet beyond earthly description. And he saw the rivers of fire rushing with divine wrath beneath the thrones of the Most High. This was not a dream. It was a transfiguration. And still he returned, not forever, but long enough to warn the world, to speak to the Watchers, to deliver heaven's reply. He brought no sword, only prophecy, but it cut deeper than any blade, and when his task was done, he was taken again, not as messenger, but as immortal witness. Traditions whisper something more, that Enoch became Metatron, the angel of the presence, the celestial scribe who sits beside the throne, clothed not in flesh but in light. He who once wrote on scrolls now records the deeds of nations in the book of days. But is it true? Did a man truly ascend and become an angel? Or was Enoch always more than mortal eyes could comprehend? Some say this is myth, others say it is mystery. But here's what cannot be denied. He was taken, and he never came back. Why would heaven lift one man while the world burned in its own rebellion? Perhaps because Enoch did not just believe in God, he walked with him. He moved with the rhythm of the divine. He listened when others scoffed. He obeyed when others played with forbidden flame. In a time of corruption, he was clarity. In an age of arrogance, he was humility. While angels fell, Enoch rose. And that is the mirror held before us all, because we live in a world that burns again. A world where truth is twisted, where temptation dresses in light and the sacred is mocked by the profane. But Enoch reminds us ascension is still possible, not by power, not by magic, but by walking in silence with the divine, by carrying burdens unseen, by speaking words no one wants to hear, by living a life that heaven cannot bear to lose. We want escape. We want miracles, but Enoch chose obedience, and that is why he was lifted. So where is he now, beyond the stars, between the veils of time? Is he watching still, writing still, waiting for the final scroll to be unrolled? Perhaps the better question is, what would he write about us? If our lives were laid bare on the parchment of eternity, what story would they tell? Because in every generation there must be one who walks with God, one who writes, one who warns, one who listens. Perhaps you are not meant to rule, not meant to fight, not meant to fall. Perhaps you are meant to walk next. The children that shook the earth, but while Enoch ascended, others descended. The Nephilim, born of rebellion, raised in violence, feared by all. They did not walk with God, they ran from him. And the earth could not hold their weight forever. In the next chapter we will walk among them. The giants, the tyrants, the cursed children of heaven and earth. And what happened when their roar reached the ears of the Most High? They once descended in light, but they wept in shadow. Their voices once echoed across heaven's corridors, sons of the sky, radiant and boundless. But now only silence answers them. And even silence has turned its face away. These were not demons, not yet. They were watchers entrusted to observe, to protect, to whisper the laws of the stars into the winds of the world. But they watched too closely, and then they reached. It was not lust alone that doomed them. It was attachment, not merely to the daughters of men, but to the earth itself. They gave themselves to time, to flesh, to the passing pleasures of mortality, and in doing so they ruptured eternity. And yet, even in their fall, they wept. Scriptures and ancient scrolls murmur a moment, one that trembled even the firmament. When the decree came down, when the high realm sealed the gates, when forgiveness was denied, the watchers wept. Their tears, it is said, fell into the depths of the earth, not as drops but as storms, and still no word came back. Why? They cried into the abyss. We have known desire, but we also know regret. We have broken the laws, but not the love. Can the stars not remember the light we once bore? But the stars stayed silent. Their plea was not a whisper, it was a roar of sorrow. A lament that rose from the hills of Hermon, from the chasms of Babylon, from the places where giants walked and where innocence was no longer safe. They turned their cries to Enoch, the mortal who walked in divine places, and through him they begged. Intercede for us, they said. Speak to the Holy One on our behalf. Tell him we have seen what we should not have seen, felt what we should not have felt, done what should never have been done. But the answer was silence. Not cruelty, not rage, but something even more terrifying, a sacred stillness. Because there are lines in the fabric of creation that once torn cannot be sewn back, not by tears, not by longing, not even by angels. And so they sat bound in gloom, not just by chains, but by the absence of mercy. Not because mercy does not exist, but because some acts wound eternity. It's easy to vilify them, to call them rebels, traitors, demons, but what if they are also broken? What if the loudest judgment was the absence of a reply? Have you ever cried out and heaven did not answer? Have you ever knelt in darkness begging for a word and received only the echo of your own breath? Then you too have felt what the watchers felt. They did not ask for freedom, Not anymore. They asked to be heard. But the chambers of the Most High did not open. The messengers did not descend. And the scrolls of mercy remained sealed. Why? Because even in the sacred there is consequence. Even in the divine there is design. And once the balance is shattered, even love itself must wait. Their sorrow became a warning, an ancient grief carved into myth, the sound of celestial weeping carried on winds that still whisper through ruins. Some say their cries became rivers, others that their tears hardened into salt, marking the places where the earth refused to forgive. But perhaps their real legacy is remembrance, because every time we reach for what is forbidden, we replay their descent. Every time we seek comfort over truth, we echo their plea. And every time we ignore the silence of our conscience, we forget their fate. The watchers are no longer the shining ones, but neither are they beasts. They are echoes, echoes of warning, echoes of consequence, echoes of what happens when even divine beings choose desire over duty. Their tears were not just for punishment, but for distance. Once they flew in the breath of the divine. Now they sit in stillness beneath the crust of the world, watching, waiting, not for release, but for the end. And here is the truth that rattles even the bones of men. They were not destroyed. They were preserved for judgment, because some betrayals must live long enough to remember what they ruined. And perhaps that is why their tears still echo, not as moisture on stone, but as tremors in the soul. A warning written not in words, but in silence. Closing reflection, so next time you feel unheard, ask yourself, are you crying in repentance or crying because you've lost the garden of your own desire? Because even angels can weep, but not all tears open the gates. Next chapter, the children that shook the earth, for though the watchers were cast down, their seed remained. The giants, the Nephilim, born of sorrow, raised in defiance. And when they walked the earth, the mountains moved. Not all silence is absence, and not all delay is denial. But when heaven does not speak, does the soul still trust? There are moments in history and in your heart when the heavens feel sealed. No thunder, no voice, no sign. Just a stillness so loud it aches. The watchers knew it. Enoch feared it. Prophets endured it. And perhaps so have you. But what is this silence? Is it a punishment, a forgetting, a cruelty wrapped in divinity, or is it a justice deeper than our cries can comprehend? When the watchers fell, their descent split the veil between realms. Their rebellion was not a scream, it was a whisper that corrupted the wind. They gave knowledge without wisdom, power without purity, desire without discipline. And when they realized the depth of what they had done, they did not run, they begged. Through Enoch, they pleaded for forgiveness, to return to the skis, to take back the seed they had scattered, to be called sons again. But no answer came, not from the throne, not from the archangels, not from the stars, only silence. That silence was not rage, it was not vengeance. It was the weight of divine order settling back into place. Because sometimes, what is broken must remain so, not out of hatred, but because even mercy has its boundaries. Throughout sacred texts, the silence of God is a theme wrapped in awe and fear. Job sat in ashes not because of sin, but because of a silence that tested even the righteous. Miriam stood in stunned quiet as her womb bore a miracle, but her voice was sealed. Eunice, in the belly of the beast, felt the walls of silence crush his soul before the light returned. And the prophets, those chosen messengers of the Most High, often walked through deserts with no voice from the heavens to guide their trembling steps. So again we ask, is divine silence a cruelty, or is it a mirror? What if the silence of God is not a void but a veil that protects us from the fullness of consequences we cannot bear to see? What if it is a divine pause, a space for reflection, for growth, for surrender? What if, in the absence of answer, the real test is, will you still walk? We want the Almighty to speak when we demand, to explain when we tremble, to heal when we ache, to justify when we rebel. But what if silence is His answer? Because a child may scream for fire, but the parent remains still, not because they do not love, but because they know what the fire will do. Imagine the throne room beyond time, the sea of glass, the thunder held back, the angels standing in still reverence, and the Almighty watching, waiting, letting silence speak where words would only burn. Because there are decisions that only eternity can carry, and consequences that even angels must bear in silence. In our world today, we cry out for answers, for justice, for healing, for vindication, but many hear nothing. The addict begging for freedom, the mother holding her child's lifeless hand, the betrayed, the abused, the abandoned screaming into the void, and the heavens feel quiet. But listen, not all silence is divine distance. Some silence is divine nearness, a test, a trust, a fire that refines what words cannot. Because when the soul no longer depends on noise, it begins to hear eternity. He was not absent, he was hidden. Not cold, but sovereign. Not deaf, but deliberate. Because what if the silence of God is not the end of a conversation, but the beginning of transformation? In the quiet chambers of your own soul, have you felt it? That sacred stillness, that ache between prayers and answers, that gap between what you want and what heaven knows you need. Watchers felt it, and so do we. But what lies beyond the silence is not despair, it is a reckoning that reshapes not just angels but entire civilizations, because silence is never the last word. It is only the space before the thunder returns. Next chapter, the children that shook the earth, and while the heavens remained still, the ground began to tremble. For the children of the watchers, the Nephilim, had risen, and they did not wait for permission. They took the world by storm. Their bones are dust now, but their shadows still walk among us, not in flesh, but in myth, in ruin, and in the trembling silence of ancient stones. They were called many names: Nephilim, watchers, sons, titans, kings, demons, gods. But beneath every legend stood a memory far older and far more terrifying. They were not born of earth alone, and earth could not forget them. Before the deluge, when stars still whispered secrets to men and mountains knew the footsteps of angels, there walked beings too vast for the world, too fierce for time, too corrupt for redemption. They were the Nephilim. Born from the union of celestial disobedience and mortal vulnerability, they were not just giants in stature. They were giants in sorrow, in wrath, and in consequence. Their birth was a tear in the veil, a wound in the sacred order. And though the flood came to wash them from memory, it could not erase what they left behind. Across the sands of Mesopotamia, legends whisper of kings who reigned for thousands of years. Ululim of Eridu, Enmenluana, Gilgamesh. They were men, but not merely. Their reigns stretch impossibly long, their strength mythic, their arrogance divine. In the Book of Giants, fragments unearthed from the Dead Sea Scrolls speak of monstrous offspring, names like Mawe and Ahia, who wandered in dreams, terrified of the judgment their fathers had unleashed. In these half-buried scrolls, we do not hear the roar of the giant, we hear its lament, a terror that even great size cannot shield from divine consequence. But why do these stories echo across civilizations? Why does nearly every ancient people, from the Sumerians to the Greeks, from the Egyptians to the Norse, carry within their mythos tales of giants, hybrids, fallen gods, and celestial wars? Perhaps because what was once real did not fully die, it simply receded into memory, into myth, into whispers passed from elder to child around fires meant to keep the dark at bay. And what the earth forgets, the soul remembers. They were not just tall, they were tyrants of instinct. They did not just walk, they ruled through fear. Their fathers had taught war, enchantment, seduction, and their sons mastered it all. Weapons forged not of metal, but of will corrupted. Kingdoms carved not by wisdom, but by domination. And when they fell, they did not fall quietly. The earth split, the mountains groaned, and the skies held their breath. Imagine this, a battlefield of stone and storm. The Nephilim rise from the mist, eyes burning with a fire not meant for this world. Their voices crack the wind. Their steps shake the rivers. And yet behind all their might was a gnawing sorrow. They were children of a forbidden love and a divine betrayal. Half glorious, half doomed. Too human to ascend, too celestial to find peace on earth. So they ruled, because it was the only way to silence the shame in their blood. And here we must ask, why does the soul tremble at tales of giants? Is it merely their size, or is it what they represent? Power unearned, knowledge unchecked, legacy cursed. Because in every age there rise those who walk like Nephilim, not in form but in spirit. Empires built on domination, souls towering in pride but hollow in light. We build giants from wealth, war, and vanity. We call them kings, idols, celebrities. And like the Nephilim, they cast long shadows but do not endure. But here is the greater mystery. Did the giants truly vanish? Or did their bloodline scatter, weakened, diluted, but never gone? Did they hide in the lineages of kings? In the crypts beneath ancient cities? In the unseen corners of power still shaping the course of nations? Is there, even now, a whisper in the wind, a pulse in the ground that speaks of something older than the flood that tried to bury it? We walk a world built upon the bones of giants. Their temples are ruins. Their names are half remembered, but their echo, it lives on. In our hunger for greatness, in our temptation toward excess, in the aching memory that once heaven touched earth. And earth bled because of it. But while their shadows stretch into myth, one voice rose above the floodwaters, a voice that walked not with giants but with God. In the next chapter, we follow the one man who was not born from the fall but chosen to survive it. Next, Noah and the echoes of the flood. He was not just a builder of an ark. He was the keeper of what was still pure. There are stones older than memory, carved before language, set before nations, and shaped with hands that may not have been entirely human. We walk among ruins, but what if they are not merely the work of men? What if beneath every sacred pillar, beneath every temple wall, there echoes the forbidden legacy of the Watchers? The winds of time blow across the Andes, and there, high in the silence of the mountains, stand the stones of Sacsayhuaman. Gigantic, interlocking, impenetrable. Stones that weigh more than trucks, fitted together with such precision that not even a blade of grass can slide between them. And yet, no tool marks, no writings, no known method to lift them. Far across the world, in the sands of Egypt, rise the pyramids of Giza, perfectly aligned with the stars, each block carved with a symmetry that mocks the limitations of early tools. Further still, beneath the jungles of Mesoamerica, lie temples like Teotihuacan, laid out like constellations, their tunnels resonant with cosmic secrets. Did man build these alone, or were they guided, taught, influenced by something that fell from heaven but refused to rise again? They were not just angels, they were watchers. They did not just observe, they descended. And when they fell, they did not fall in silence. They brought gifts: knowledge, geometry, language, astronomy, alchemy. But these were not gifts of mercy. They were gifts out of time, out of order, out of heaven's will. And knowledge without permission is never without consequence. In the Book of Enoch, it is said the Watchers taught men to read the stars, to bend metals, to enchant spirits, to beautify faces, to awaken desires, to make war, to craft spells, to harness earth's power without reverence for the one who formed it. What began as curiosity became corruption. What was meant to serve began to enslave. And temples were not built for worship, but to mimic the heavens the Watchers could no longer return to. They built ziggurats and towers to touch the skies, not as prayers but as challenges. Picture this: a night sky blanketing ancient Mesopotamia. Priests ascend a ziggurat step by step, each level a symbol of a celestial realm. In their hands, obsidian tools etched with symbols taught by the fallen. Beneath them, villagers bring offerings not to God, but to gods made of memory and fear. The air is thick with incense. The stars shimmer, but not with peace. There is tension in the cosmos, a watching, a waiting. And somewhere beyond the veil, the Watchers weep for what their wisdom has become. But why does it matter now? Why speak of ruins and ancient stones? Because what was once stone has become steel. What was once a temple is now a tower of glass, built not for the soul but for ego. We are still building, still reaching, still climbing mountains we do not understand. We decode DNA, split atoms, command satellites, But do we ask why we must know, and who once asked before us? The Watchers were not condemned for what they knew, but for what they gave. Knowledge outside of humility becomes a weapon, and humanity has not forgotten how to aim it. So the question lingers, are these temples mere coincidence? Or is there a pattern, a celestial blueprint woven through ancient architecture, waiting to be deciphered? Why do pyramids align to Orion? Why do sacred chambers echo like the human ear? Why do ancient texts across continents describe beings who taught from the stars? And most of all, what else did they teach that remains hidden beneath the dust? There is an eerie silence within these temples now. But silence is not absence. It is memory, echoing softly through the stones, waiting for those who still listen. And perhaps it is not the ruins we should fear, but the rebuilding. Because when knowledge rises again without reverence, when power is held without purity, the curse of the Watchers does not need to fall again. It is already here, in how we build, in why we rise, in the temples of our modern pride. The Watchers gave us more than enchantments. They left behind architecture of ambition, sacred geometry twisted by fallen hearts, altars that touched the sky but forgot to bow to the one who made it. And so today, we must ask not only how they built, but why. Not only what remains, but what waits. Because ruins are never just remnants, they are warnings, silent, sacred, and still speaking. In the next chapter, we descend not into stone, but into sound, into the legends of voices, trumpets, and heavenly cries that once shook mountains. The Watchers in the Quran, shadows and echoes, they are not called by name, but they are there in the echoes between the verses, in the shadows behind divine tests, in the whispered legends passed between generations. The Watchers. They do not vanish from sacred memory. They reappear under different skis with different names, in warnings wrapped in wisdom. And when we open the Quran, we do not see them directly, but we feel them, watching still. In the sacred traditions, there is a story, a strange one, hidden like a pearl in the depths of divine literature. Two angels, Harut and Marut, sent down to the people of Babylon, not as destroyers, not as judges, but as a test. They came not to seduce, but to warn. Not to rebel, but to reveal the heavy burden of free will and the fine line between divine knowledge and forbidden power. They taught sorcery, but only after saying, "We are only a trial, so do not disbelieve." Al-Baqarah 2:102. But who were they? Why Babylon? Why this trial? And why does their tale feel like an echo from Mount Hermon, where the Watchers fell? Harut and Marut were not just angels, they were messengers of discipline. They descended not to sin, but to witness how humans would wield what heaven once forbade. They were not fallen, but they descended into a world heavy with temptation, into a people eager for shortcuts, for spells, for secrets, for power without submission. Where the Watchers gave forbidden knowledge, Harut and Marut tested it. The difference, obedience, and the divine permission to teach within limits. But is every test passed? In this chapter of sacred reflection, we must step lightly. For these stories are not mere fables, they are veiled truths, symbols, warnings. The parallels are unsettling. The Watchers of Enoch taught sorcery, astrology, the arts of seduction and violence. The people of Babylon learned magic too, dividing lovers, conjuring illusions, binding destinies with tongue and parchment. But the Quran distinguishes. The knowledge was not evil, the use of it was. The angels gave the warning first, and choice followed. This is the essence of the divine test. Knowledge is a fire. It can light a lamp or burn down a world. But ask yourself, were Harut and Marut a second chance after the Watchers' fall? Or were they heaven's controlled mirror of what happens when divine beings descend into the chaos of earth? And what of the jinn? The unseen beings made of smokeless fire, free-willed, curious, some obedient, some rebellious. Are they the heirs of the Watchers' whispers, or a separate lineage woven into the same shadowed tapestry of the unseen? They too traverse dimensions. They too can whisper into hearts. They too can teach or tempt. And when one among them refused to bow to man, was it pride alone or memory of what happened when celestial beings gave too much? Picture the dry heat of Babylon. The sun hangs heavy over ancient stones, and two angels walk among the people cloaked in the form of men. Their eyes are not cruel, but they shine with the sadness of beings who know too much. Their voices are calm, measured, holy, and before they teach, they warn. This is a test. Do not disbelieve. Scrolls unravel. Words are recited, but in the shadows, desire trembles. Some take what is offered and seek healing, clarity, understanding. Others take it to bind, to control, to divide. The heavens are still watching. And so we arrive at the core of the mystery, not the identity of these beings, but what they represent in us. Because the Watchers did not just fall, they revealed what happens when knowledge is worshipped instead of the one who gives it. We are still tested. Every day. By algorithms, by genetics, by illusions we call progress. The Harut and Marut within us ask, will you submit to divine order, or will you use knowledge to dominate, to seduce, to corrupt? And the jinn around us and within whisper ancient songs of pride, of rebellion, of freedom without guidance. The stories are sacred mirrors, not of the past, but of the soul. In this Quranic tale we find not contradiction but completion, not mythology but meditation. Harut and Marut are not the Watchers, but they are echoes, refractions, a sacred caution that not all who descend are cast out. Some are sent with a message that power without humility is corruption, and curiosity without conscience is collapse. The Watchers fell. Harut and Marut were tested, and humanity, we are still in between. We carry ancient echoes in our temples, our texts, our hearts. But what happens when the test is failed again? In the next chapter, we journey toward that reckoning, toward the great unraveling, toward the judgment that shattered the skies. The flood washed away a world, but did it wash away their blood? They were not just giants. They were echoes of rebellion made flesh, the children of angels and women, born of lust and fire, of sky and soil, of sacred law broken under the stars. The Nephilim. They were supposed to perish. But did they? The storm had come, and with it the judgment that broke the back of a corrupted earth. Mountains drowned. Cities gasped their last breath beneath the waves. And the hybrid ones, those born of forbidden unions, were thought to be no more. But silence is not always the end. Sometimes it is only the breath before the next shadow rises. The scriptures close that chapter with a flood, but the land remembers those who once walked taller than the trees and hungered deeper than any beast. Goliath of Gath, towering, armored in bronze, a man who moved like a storm of flesh. He was not merely a warrior, he was a remnant, a whisper from before the deluge, a reminder. Was he the last of them? Or just the most famous? Picture the battlefield, the sky dim with dust, the valley torn between two armies, Israel on one side, Philistia on the other. And then he steps forward, not walking, but thundering, each step like the cracking of an ancient stone. He does not call for blood, he calls for fear. And none dare answer except a shepherd boy armed with nothing but a sling and the whisper of divine favor. But beneath Goliath's strength was a genealogy lost to time. Bloodline not of earth alone, something older, something darker, something that survived. The Book of Numbers speaks of Anakim, descendants of Anak, giants who dwelled in Canaan. Moses' spies trembled before them. They said, "We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes." Deuteronomy names the Rephaim, shades, giants, inhabitants of forgotten cities who were dispossessed by divine decree. And in Genesis 6:4, a chilling line lingers. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that. Also after that, after the flood, after the cleansing, how? Were some hidden in caves beyond the reach of the waters? Were their spirits revived in men of war and conquest? Or did their legacy bleed into the veins of tyrants who carried no wings, but the same thirst for dominion? The Watchers did not just fall, they left seeds. Not just in women, but in knowledge, in war, in desire. And those seeds, some say, bloomed long after the ark found rest. The flood drowned their bodies, but not their memory. And memory is a powerful kind of resurrection. Perhaps the children of the Watchers survived not through bone, but through ambition. Through architecture, through sorcery, through empires built on slavery and divine defiance. Was Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord, one of them? Was his city, Babel, a second rebellion, a tower meant to pierce what heaven had once denied? But here is the question we have been avoiding. If they survived the flood, where are they now? Some point to the mountains of Bashan, a land of caves and shadow. Others to ancient Sumerian kings who claimed reigns of tens of thousands of years. Some whisper of bloodlines hidden within royal houses. Others believe they took refuge not in the earth but beneath it, into realms unseen, where time folds, and old things wait for new invitations. Have you ever wondered why the legends of giants span every culture? Why megalithic stones, impossible to lift even now, are found on every continent? Are these merely myths, or are we surrounded by their ruins? This is not just a story about giants. It is a mirror for humanity, because the Nephilim were not just tall, they were unrestrained. Power without humility, curiosity without submission. They were born of forbidden desire and became symbols of what happens when boundaries are broken for the sake of becoming more than human. Do we not chase the same today? In laboratories, in AI, in gene editing, in digital towers that reach to the sky coded in silence and ambition, are we building new giants, not in size but in influence, not with muscle but with mind? The Nephilim story is a warning wrapped in mystery, a sacred parable of what happens when the divine order is disrupted and the unnatural is embraced. So, did they survive? Perhaps not in full form but in essence, in archetype, in legacy. Their bones may be buried, but their echo lives on in every empire that reaches for the heavens without kneeling to the one who made them. And in every soul who seeks power without permission, we find a flicker of their hunger. The flood tried to wash it away, but the earth remembers. The question now is not did they survive, but have we become them? And if so, what will awaken next from the shadows of their legacy? They fell from grace. They were cast out, cut off, condemned. Their names written in fire, not light. But somewhere in the silence of exile did they still whisper a prayer. There is a sorrow deeper than death, a sorrow not of wounds but of distance from the Creator himself. The Watchers knew that sorrow. They were not mortals. They had seen the face of heaven. They had stood in radiant ranks where only obedience was sung. But they chose to descend, chose to grasp what was not theirs to hold, chose desire over decree. And when judgment came, it was not with fire but with silence, the silence of God, the kind that crushes louder than thunder, the kind that does not answer even when knees break and eyes burn with repentance. The Book of Enoch tells us when the Watchers pleaded for mercy, they sent Enoch as their intercessor. He walked among them, a mortal yet chosen to carry their lament before the throne. And when he returned, his face pale, his voice shaken, he bore not a message of comfort, but of denial. Their request was refused. The gates were closed, the answer final. Never again shall you rise to the heavens. You will never be forgiven. Your children will perish, and you shall watch it all in chains. Imagine them, those once robed in celestial light, now scattered beneath the earth. Some buried beneath the sands of Samyaza, others imprisoned in the deep in a realm of stilled time where stone weeps and flame has no warmth. But somewhere in the abyss, perhaps, single voice still cries out, "Have you forgotten mercy?" And that is the agony of the unforgiven, not the punishment, but the question, can a heart truly be cut off from the possibility of return? Scriptures across traditions echo this paradox of those who crossed a line so deep, so absolute, that mercy seemed to flee from even the breath of their name. In the Islamic narrative, Iblis, who once worshipped with the angels, was cast down, not for a single sin, but for pride without repentance, for defiance without regret. He prayed, but not for forgiveness. He prayed for time, and he was granted it, not because he was loved, but because he was necessary. Even the unforgiven play a role in the divine tapestry, but does that mean they are beyond return? And more deeply, if even the angels who sinned were denied mercy, what hope is there for us? This is the haunting heart of the human condition. We sin, we fall, we forget. And in those moments when the guilt feels too heavy, too old, too ugly to bring before the throne, we ask, is it too late for me? Has my chance passed? Is the silence of heaven proof that my prayers have no weight? But here lies the difference. We are not the watchers. We were made to forget so that we could be taught to remember. We were made to fall so we could learn how to rise not through pride but through surrender. Where the watchers pleaded from a place of punishment, the believer prays from a place of yearning. There is no heartbreak more holy than the one that returns to God even after silence. Because what if the silence is not rejection but refinement? The watchers wanted restoration without transformation. They mourned what they lost, but not what they had become. And so their prayer was a plea for reversal, not redemption. But true repentance is not asking for the past to return. It is breaking before the present and asking to become someone new. God's mercy in all sacred traditions is described not as passive but as near, closer than veins, quicker than speech, vaster than memory. And yet some are denied. So the question remains, why? Was it the nature of their sin or the absence of true remorse? Did they cry because they were cast down or because they had truly wronged the divine order? And if a being is beyond forgiveness, can they still pray? Can longing still live in a heart that has been judged? Or does judgment consume even hope? Or is that longing in itself a hidden sign of divine mercy, a flicker that even in the darkness there is still a path, though it may not lead to return but to understanding? Perhaps this chapter is not about them, not the watchers, not the exiled ones, not even the giants born of their sin. Perhaps this chapter is about us. Because we too walk between light and fall. We too kneel and sometimes feel the sky remains unmoved. But the difference is this: we are not silence, we are breath. We are dust that was chosen to be shaped by mercy. And so long as our heart beats, so long as the night still comes with stars instead of fire, we are not beyond prayer. We are not beyond forgiveness. But what if one of them did repent? Not for escape, not for favor, but for the ache of having broken heaven itself. Would such a tear reach the throne? Would the silence finally break? They were not only ancient, they were not only fallen, they were not only myth, they are still here, not in the skies but in us. Before they fell, the watchers stood in realms we cannot imagine, light without shadow, obedience without question. They were not cursed creatures, they were holy, trusted, set upon the mountains of heaven's will, guardians, observers, sentinels of sacred order. But desire does not always come with horns. Temptation does not always arrive in chaos. Sometimes it comes softly, as love, as beauty, as longing for more. They looked down, and what they saw was us, the daughters of men, the warmth of flesh, the beauty of frailty, and something in them moved, not all at once, not as rebellion, but as curiosity, as yearning. They were not just cast down by command. They were pulled by what was already rising within them. That is the truest danger. Because the greatest falls begin not in defiance but in desire. We study the watchers as if they were other, distant, alien, doomed, but they are a mirror. For every time we stood before a forbidden gate and chose to enter, knowing we should not, we carried their echo. For every time we reached for a light not meant for us, a power, a secret, a thrill, we felt their fingerprint on our soul. The watchers were not just beings. They are metaphors. They are the part of us that sees what is sacred and still wants to possess it. They were not just angels, they were the promise of eternity. And they were not just fallen, they became the memory of what we fear becoming. But here lies the twist: they were punished. And we are still here, still tested, still trembling, still choosing. What does that say? What does that mean? Perhaps their story was not written to condemn, but to warn. Because the war is no longer in the sky. It is in the soul, yours, mine. Ours, and the battlefield is temptation. Picture this: a man stands at a screen, scrolling endlessly through illusions of power, lust, wealth. Each swipe a whisper, each image an invitation. Or a woman stares at a closed door in her heart, knowing that to open it would mean breaking what is sacred within her. Or a child, small and unseen, steals what is not theirs, not for greed, but to feel something real. Do you see it now? The watchers are not just there, they are here, in these choices, in these cracks. What separates us from them? Why do we still have time? Why were we given the chance to return while they were locked beneath the deep? Could it be that our weakness was our design? That in our brokenness was always the hidden invitation to surrender, to fall forward, not away? And if we carry their shadow, can we also carry their redemption? Not for them, but for ourselves. The story of the Watchers is not about angels alone. It's about the war between impulse and purpose, between seeing and obeying, between wanting and waiting. It is the story of every human who has ever looked at a boundary and asked, "Why not me?" It's the whisper that says, "You deserve it," even when it's forbidden, even when it's borrowed light. But that's where the mystery deepens, because within every forbidden desire is the seed of divine awareness, not to indulge it, but to recognize it, to tame it, to transform it, to rise, not because we never fell, but because we chose not to stay there. So ask yourself, what is the Watcher within me watching? What desires have I named holy when they were only hollow? What beauty have I reached for that cost me my peace? We are not punished with silence like they were, but we are warned with stories, with symbols, with scripture wrapped in shadows. The story of the Watchers is not just what happened, it's what still happens, every day, every thought, every unspoken hunger. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is right now. Because even in this moment, the unseen war moves around us. And if your heart feels called, subscribe for more. But if the Watchers live within us, what happens when we refuse their voice? When we choose restraint over rebellion, silence over seduction, surrender over pride? Is that the moment we rise above them? Or is that the moment we remember why we were chosen to fall last and rise first? Next, we open the veil. They no longer wear wings. They do not speak in thunder. But they are still here. Not in the heavens, but in the algorithm, in the mirror, in the whisper behind your scrolling thumb. The Watchers may have fallen, but what they taught never left. In the days before the flood, the Watchers descended, drawn not by rebellion, but by beauty, by desire, by the thrill of knowing what should remain veiled. They brought secrets, not just of heaven's order, but of weapons, enchantments, the rhythm of the stars, and the seduction of the face. They taught sorcery. They taught vanity. They taught men to bend light and women to wield it. And then came the flood, but not everything drowned. The waters receded, but the seeds they planted remained. Today, we live not in the days of the Watchers, but in their echo. 1,000 devices light up like stars across the earth, each one a glowing altar to distraction, to image, to control, to the pursuit of knowledge that serves only the self. What was once called sorcery now calls itself influence. What was once forbidden now comes with a follow button. They were once punished for revealing what heaven sealed. Now we reward those who break the sacred veil with likes, applause, and fleeting power. But is it really so different? Is it truly new? Or are we simply rewalking a path that once ended in fire and flood? We say we are more advanced, but are we? We do not build altars of stone, we build platforms. We do not sacrifice animals, we sacrifice attention, identity, and time. Not to idols of gold, but to illusions of ourselves, perfected and filtered. We are not climbing towers of Babel, but towers of ego, of data, of artificial power. And at the top, we find emptiness. And at the bottom, we find ourselves. But who whispers now? If the Watchers were bound in chains, who teaches the modern hand to mold the sacred into spectacle? If the Nephilim were washed away, who revives their defiance in the glint of fame-hungry eyes? Is it us? Have we become the new Watchers? Or are the spirits that once moved among the mountains now moving through code, through commerce, through unchecked desire disguised as progress? Picture this. A young woman stands before a ring light, offering her soul for visibility, not knowing who watches, not caring who receives. A man scrolls deep into the night, his eyes wide with forbidden knowledge. He calls it research, but his spirit is slowly unraveling. A child repeats spells of self-worship taught not in temples but in trends. Can you feel it? The air is charged. Not with divinity, but with an ache for power, recognition, and escape. The ancient sins now wear modern names. but the hunger behind them remains unchanged. We are all tempted, not because we are evil, but because we are incomplete. The watchers fell not from cruelty, but from curiosity, from the ache of emptiness that only the divine was meant to fill, and yet they filled it with the wrong fire. And now we do the same, only faster, only quieter, only disguised. We seek knowledge, but not wisdom. We crave influence, but not purpose. We chase beauty, but not the soul beneath it. The very tools that were once deemed forbidden have become normalized, sanitized, marketed, and we wonder why our hearts still feel hollow. So what do we do standing in this river of noise where temptation no longer looks evil, it looks necessary? We remember. We remember that not every light is divine, that not all knowledge heals, that not all power elevates. Some chains come dressed as crowns. Some prisons arrive in golden frames. To resist the spirits of old, we must reclaim the silence they fear, the stillness, the return to what is unseen but never absent. The watchers may have fallen, but the temptation they introduced still rises like smoke from an invisible altar. And perhaps, just perhaps, this generation has not escaped the judgment. It has only delayed it. Next, we open what few dare to touch. There are prayers that rise like fire and fall like ash. There are nights so long they feel eternal, not because of pain, but because heaven remains silent. What do we do when even God says nothing? What do we do when the answer is no? In every age there were those who pleaded, who fasted, who wept at the edge of the sacred. And sometimes the clouds did not part. The sea did not split. The chains were not broken. Prophets knew it. Saints tasted it. And even the most beloved were tested with silence. Consider Job, stripped of everything, children, wealth, health, not because he sinned, but because heaven had permitted the storm to enter. He cried, "Oh, that I knew where I might find him." And still no answer. But Job didn't walk away. He endured. He endured not because he understood, but because he trusted even in the silence. We speak often of answered prayers, of miracles, of divine mercy that arrives just in time. But sacred texts also whisper of the space in between, where prayers float unanswered and mercy hides behind the veil of delay. There is a holiness in heaven's silence, a lesson in every pause. Because sometimes, God's greatest answer is to let you stand in the fire and not be consumed. Not removed from the pain, but refined within it. Not rescued from the flood, but taught to build an ark. Not shielded from sorrow, but stretched until your soul grows wide enough to carry what's coming. He was not just left alone, he was being prepared. You were not just forgot, you were being formed. The delay was not divine disinterest, it was divine design. The silence was not rejection. It was a rearranging of what you thought you needed into what you truly came to become. But how do we endure when the heavens feel sealed? When our knees are raw from praying and nothing moves, when the doors close and stay closed, when healing does not come, when the loved one is not saved, when the trial doesn't end but deepens. Is it punishment or is it sacred selection? Are we abandoned or being trusted with a burden few could carry? Imagine the prophet in the cave, no army, no support, only echoes and the weight of what had not yet begun. Or Mary told she would carry a child but given no blueprint for how to survive the stairs, the suspicion, the storm. Or Eunice, Jonah swallowed whole, in darkness. No promise, only surrender, and still they didn't curse the silence. They spoke to it, they endured, not because they had proof, but because they held a sacred hope that was not shaken by what their eyes could not see. In our modern world, we are trained to expect instant answers, instant healing, instant redemption. But the soul does not move at the speed of Wi-Fi. The spirit does not operate on demand. When God says not yet, or even no, it is not cruelty, it is clarity. It is a call to lean into trust that has no guarantees except this: that silence is not absence, that distance is not desertion. That pain is often the birthplace of prophecy, and that waiting is its own form of worship. We survive silence by learning to sing without an audience, by learning to pray not for outcomes but for alignment, by learning to say, Even if you do not part the sea, I will still walk toward it. Even if the fire comes, I will still light the lamp. Even if my voice cracks, I will still call out your name. This is the endurance of the faithful. This is the kind of strength the watchers never understood, because true power is not in what you control, but in what you carry with reverence when you feel nothing in return. And so, when God refuses, we don't fall apart. We fall deeper into surrender, because the ones who are chosen are not those with perfect lives, but those who endure when the heavens go quiet. Next, we step into what was once forbidden to hear. They were bound beneath the mountains, not killed, not forgotten, but sealed. And when the final trumpet sounds, when the last seal breaks, the abyss will stir again. But what sleeps beneath was never meant to wake. In the shadows of prophecy, buried deep in the folds of time, there lies a trembling secret. Not all fallen ones were cast into fire. Some were chained, some were reserved, some were held for the appointed hour. The ancient texts speak in whispers of 4 angels bound at the great river Euphrates, not slain, not silenced, but waiting, for a moment foretold before the foundations of the earth were laid. Revelation 9 echoes like thunder across apocalyptic skies. Release the 4 angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. And when they rise, they do not rise alone. A smoke shall rise with them, not from earth, but from the abyss itself. The pit, long sealed, breaks open. And what spills forth is not just darkness, but memory. The memory of rebellion, of ancient covenants broken, of watchers who defied heaven to walk among the daughters of dust. But why are they released at the end and not destroyed in the beginning? Because judgment has a rhythm, and divine wrath does not forget what time remembers. Those bound in the abyss represent more than punishment, they are prophecy. Each chained spirit is not just a prisoner, but a warning. A fragment of the first rebellion held in sacred pause until the world is ready to confront what it invited in secret. And so the question rises, are these 4 angels the same watchers who once descended upon Ardes? Are they the echoes of Semjaza, or remnants of a deeper, more ancient fall? We cannot say with certainty, but we know this: they do not rise to warn, they rise to unleash. Imagine it, the sound of the 6th trumpet ringing through the bones of the earth, dust rising from cracked soil, the rivers trembling as if remembering what lies beneath. And then a wind black as grief, cold as silence, rushing from the chasm. And from it faces that once watched the stars descend again, but no longer in longing and wrath. They bring not knowledge but torment, not gifts but swords, not love but ruin. The world will not greet them with songs, the heavens will not shield us, because this is not their descent, it is their release. They do not fall, they rise, and that is what makes them so terrifying. But what are they rising to do? Are they here to reclaim what was once forbidden to them? Are they the final consequence of humanity's obsession with forbidden power? Will they walk among us again, cloaked not in wings but in influence? Not giants but ideologies, not thrones but systems. Have we already welcomed them in our cities, in our screens, in our hearts? Or are we still waiting for the abyss to fully open? In every generation, we chase what was once locked away. The watchers offered forbidden knowledge, and now we carry computers in our palms with the pride of ancient gods. They gave enchantments, and now we blur lines between soul and machine. They taught the secrets of the heavens, and we now try to code immortality into silicon and steel. We have not forgotten the watchers, we've become them. In a world that has resurrected Babel in the form of satellites and towers, in algorithms and surveillance, we are once again calling out to the abyss to open, not with ritual but with rebellion, not with altars but with arrogance. And the price may be what Scripture tried to warn us about all along. This is not just the end, this is the unsealing, not the end of life but the unveiling of what has always hidden beneath it. Not just punishment but prophecy fulfilled, not chaos but the permitted storm, because the abyss does not open on its own, it must be allowed. And when it is not simply evil that walks the earth, it is justice, it is balance, It is the final reckoning for what humanity refused to repent. The final awakening of the abyss is not only about angels, it's about us, about how far we push the divine boundaries, how we repainted sins as virtues, how we taught our children to mock the sacred, how we dug into the earth and pulled up things we were never meant to touch. The abyss awakens not just below us but within us. And in that final hour, no one will wonder why it came. So now the question isn't, will the Watchers return? The real question is, have we summoned them already without knowing it? And when the seals fall and the chains break and the pit yawns wide, will you be watching the sky or hiding from it? Because next, we step into a sound that once moved heaven itself and was later silenced. There is a war not of kingdoms nor of nations, but of thrones beyond time. A war you cannot see, but that sees you, every moment, every breath. The battlefield is not only the heavens above, but the hearts below. In the stillness between night and dawn, in the hush before a whisper reaches the soul, there echoes a sound the world cannot hear, a clash of wings, a cry of divine thunder, a war beyond our sight. It began before Adam stood, before the rivers flowed, before even the stars learned their names. There was a command, one law, one light. And from that light came angels, beings forged of fire, sworn not to feel but to serve. But one among them looked upon his own brilliance and saw not obedience but worth, not duty but desire. He rose in silence and fell in thunder, and thus began the war between light and shadow, between submission and self. Imagine it, the heavens ablaze with righteousness, hosts upon hosts aligned in sacred formation, their swords not made of metal but of divine decree. And from the rift of rebellion a chasm opened, not just in the skies but in eternity. Lightning did not fall alone. With it came legions cast out, not destroyed. For justice delays but never forgets. And in their fall, these once radiant beings sought to twist what they had lost, to corrupt what they once guarded. Where they once echoed praise, they now whisper doubt. Where they once bowed in reverence, they now rise in pride. But the war was never only theirs. It passed from the skies into the soul of man. Heaven's justice is not just judgment, it is balance. And this war, though unseen by the naked eye, is witnessed in every trial we face. Obedience and desire, the eternal struggle between surrender and seduction. Faith and fear, the storm between trust and temptation. Purity and pride, the weight between the whisper of God and the roar of the self. The ancients called it the battle of the heavens, but in truth it is the battle for you. Every choice you make, every thought you entertain, either strengthens the armies of light or fuels the rebellion of shadow, because the battlefield is not just above, it is within. But if heaven has already decreed its justice, why does the war still rage? Why are the shadows permitted to whisper? Why do temptations still coil around our every step? Why does God allow the darkness to move so freely in a world that seeks His light? Could it be that justice delayed is not justice denied, but rather mercy extended? Perhaps this war is not only about punishment, but purification. Because light that has never faced darkness does not know its own brilliance. A soul never tested may walk upright but not deep. And so, heaven allows the trial not to break you but to reveal you, to strip away the illusions, the noise, the vanity, until what remains is what was written on your soul before the earth had form. Every betrayal you've endured, every loss that broke you, every silent night when the heavens felt closed, these were not moments of abandonment. They were battles. Fought not against flesh and blood, but against rulers of the unseen, against principalities of the abyss. You are not alone in your struggle. You are not weak for your sorrow. You are a soldier in a war ancient as the stars and sacred as the breath of the angels. This is not a war of swords, but of wills, not of noise, but of silence, not of cities falling, but of hearts rising. And the most dangerous battlefield is the moment when no one is watching, when your choice is quiet, when no applause follows your obedience. That is where heaven listens closest. That is where justice is written in ink unseen. That is where the war is either won or prolonged. Just as the watchers once fell from the skis seeking desire over duty, so too do we fall when we choose the easy over the eternal. Just as they descended for forbidden knowledge, we seek shortcuts to glory, thinking we can bypass the fire and still receive the crown. But the heavens do not operate on convenience. They operate on truth, and truth, no matter how hidden, always demands a reckoning. And so the war continues in unseen halls of the heavens, in boardrooms filled with quiet corruption, in bedrooms where trust has died, in voices silenced by shame, and in prayers choked by doubt. Yet every moment you rise, every time you forgive when it hurts, every tear turned into prayer, every wound you do not let define you, you echo the archangels. You do not fight alone, you never have. And when the final trumpet sounds, this war will be revealed for what it truly was, not a war of angels but of hearts. And justice, eternal and unshakable, will stand not just as a sword but as a mirror. Because next we descend into one of the deepest veils ever cast. There will come a day when time will no longer move forward, it will stand still, like breath before a sentence, like the silence before the verdict is spoken. And in that stillness, every voice that ever wept in the dark will rise. Even the chained ones, even the fallen. The day of reckoning, the final gathering. The hour when the sky tears like parchment and the earth exhales every secret it once buried. It is called by many names but known by all creation. The mountains will tremble, the seas will still, and even the stars will bow as the scroll of deeds is unrolled. On this day, there is no veil left to hide behind. No mask of power, no cloak of pride, no shadow deep enough to escape the light. The heavens will open not gently but like a wound, and through that opening will pour truth pure and unfiltered. It is not just the judgment of man. It is the reckoning of angels, of jinn, of beasts seen and unseen. And somewhere deep in the abyss the watchers will stir. Imagine it. A great plain, endless and luminous, yet not of this world. Millions know, billions stand, silent as dust, the prophets at the front. The righteous like lanterns, the wicked like smoke. The sound of the trumpet has echoed, the scrolls have been weighed, and the chains, those forged by divine decree, begin to hum with the sound of approaching justice. Deep beneath the firmament where the watchers have remained shackled since the ancient rebellion, there is movement. Not of escape, but of awareness. They know this is the day every plea will be heard, even theirs. The Book of Enoch speaks of their cries, how they begged one of their own to write a petition, to send it above the clouds to the throne of the Most High. But the answer was silence, and silence was judgment. They were not just imprisoned, they were forgotten. Yet Judgment Day is not just for the remembered. It is the day when everything speaks, even the dust, even the chains, even the sins that were swallowed and never confessed aloud. And in that divine courtroom, what becomes of the watchers? Will mercy descend upon those who once descended in defiance? Or are some rebellions too deep for forgiveness to reach? Did they regret, or did they merely despair? Was their sorrow born of love for the Creator, or only grief for their loss of heaven? Were they ever truly repentant? And if they were, is redemption ever truly out of reach? What does divine mercy look like when it stares into the eyes of beings who knew the glory of God and still chose otherwise? These questions hover like smoke on the edge of prophecy. Because isn't that the secret fear of every soul that has ever wandered? That maybe they've fallen too far. That maybe the heavens have gone silent not from patience, but from finality. We ask ourselves, can one prayer ever unshackle what sin has chained? Can the tears of a single night undo the rebellion of a lifetime? We are not so different from the watchers. They fell from light because they reached for what was forbidden. So do we. Each time we chase what corrupts the heart, each time we choose pride over humility, each time we ignore the whispers of conscience, we fall. Not from heaven, but from our own fitra, our God-given balance. But if the watchers were once silenced, and yet will still stand before the throne, then maybe we too, in our darkest moment, are not as far from the light as we think. He was not just a judge, he was the witness of every heartbeat. They were not just sinners, they were once angels burning with glory. And this was not just a punishment, it was a pause. A long, aching pause before the final note of their story. Because Judgment Day is not only about wrath, it is about revealing. And when all is revealed, when no deception can survive the weight of truth, then justice is no longer distant, it is face to face. So imagine the watchers standing once more, no longer wrapped in chains but in memory, their story told before the throne, their crimes laid bare in the light. And maybe, just maybe, a spark of sorrow finds its way upward. Will it be met with fire or with forgiveness? We are not told. Scripture leaves some doors closed not to confuse us, but to humble us. Because the outcome of their fate is not the lesson. The weight of it is. The reminder that nothing is hidden, that no choice is forgotten, and that even those who once flew beside the stars are not exempt from the gravity of consequence. And yet, as the final winds rise, as the throne prepares to speak its last decree, a silence will fall across creation, not of fear but of awe, because in the next chapter we will enter a realm beyond judgment. A realm where music once flowed in forbidden chords, and where the sound of truth it is not over, not by thunder, not by flood, not even by chains forged for angels, because the greatest war is the one you cannot see. And you, yes, you are already standing in it. From the heights of heaven to the broken soil of earth, this story has thundered through time. Of watchers who fell, of giants who rose, of whispers that turned into storms. We have walked through their descent, stood at the edge of the abyss, watched stars fall, and wept beside prophets who warned us. But now the veil lifts again, not backward into the past, but inward. Because the true battlefield was never only on Mount Hermon. It is not just beneath the Euphrates or in the caves where fallen knowledge sleeps. It is inside us, in our silence, in our screens, in the breath between choice and regret. You are not merely watching this story. You were inside it all along. Every temptation the watchers faced, you face it too, not with wings but with will. You do not need to descend from the heavens to fall into darkness. It takes only one step. One compromise, one whisper you choose not to resist. The same forbidden longing that stirred in the sons of God now flickers behind vanity, lurks beneath the hunger for influence, hides in the ego that fears being unseen. The Nephilim are gone, but the impulse that birthed them has never left. Can you feel it? That pull. When no one's watching. That flicker when pride offers a crown you know isn't yours. That moment when your soul aches for something deeper but the world distracts you with glitter and noise. This is the battlefield, not with swords but with scrolls, not with blood but with intention, not in ancient deserts but in bedrooms, offices, alleys, and on the glowing altars of the digital realm. Angels may not walk beside you in form, but their gaze is near. And the war they once fought in the skis, it never ended. It just moved to the soul, to your soul. So ask yourself, when your name is called not by man but by the unseen realm, will you be standing in obedience or drowning in distraction? Have you already fallen and just haven't noticed? Or worse, have you surrendered your watchfulness in the name of comfort? Who are the modern watchers? What secrets do we chase that were never ours to touch? And when the books are opened, when silence breaks into divine judgment, what war stories will your heart tell? This war is not about perfection, it's about awareness. It's not that you will never stumble, it's that you must rise every time you do. The soul is the last sacred territory where heaven still waits. Each choice to speak kindly, to resist the darkness, to forgive, to remember the unseen is a sword in this invisible battle. You don't need to be holy to fight. You need to be awake. And sacred vigilance is not a posture of fear. It is a whisper of remembrance that echoes through every breath. You are not just a bystander, you are the battlefield. You are not just a servant, you are the witness of two realms wrestling through your spirit. And you are not just a soul walking toward death, you are a divine echo given a choice to rise. So now I ask you, not as a storyteller, but as a fellow traveler on this sacred path, tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Because even in this moment, yes, this very breath, the unseen war moves around us. And if your heart feels called, subscribe. Not for the story, but for the awakening it stirs, because the war is real. And now you know, this was never just a documentary. It was a mirror, a prayer, a warning, and a hope. The angels fell, the giants died, the watchers were bound, but you are still writing your scroll. The war continues, not in the clouds, but in the choices you make when no one is watching. So walk slowly, speak softly, pray like your soul is a battlefield, because it is. And may you rise not as one who merely watched this sacred story, but as one who answered it with light, with stillness, with sacred fire.